Hey guys, imagine waking up in ancient Rome, where the togas are itchy, the streets smell like a mix of wine and despair, and your neighbor's idea of a good time involves a gladiator fight or something far less family friendly. Welcome to the untold history of homosexuality in ancient Rome, a wild, absurd, and often brutal ride through a world where love, lust, and power collided in ways that would make even the most scandalous reality show blush. Buckle up, because this isn't your high school history class. We're diving into saga of passion, betrayal, and survival in a city that was equal parts orgy and obituary. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Picture this, it's 200 BCE, and Rome is a sprawling mess of temples, markets, and people shouting about politics or fish prices. The Republic is young, scrappy, and hungry, but it's also a place where survival means playing a game of social chess with knives instead of pawns. Homosexuality? Oh, it's everywhere, but don't expect rainbow flags or pride parades. In Rome, same-sex relationships were less about identity and more about power, status, and occasionally, actual affection, if you were lucky. The Romans didn't have a word for gay or straight. They just had desires, and those desires came with a rule book thicker than a senator's ego. Let's start with the basics. Roman society was a pyramid of privilege, and at the top sat the elite men, patricians with money, land, and a knack for making everyone else miserable. These guys could do pretty much whatever they wanted, including pursuing men, women, or the occasional statue if the wine was strong enough. But here's the catch. It wasn't about who you slept with, it was about how you did it. In Roman terms, being the active partner was manly, noble, and basically a flex. Being the passive partner? That was a one-way ticket to Shametown unless you were young, beautiful, or had no choice in the matter. And trust me, plenty didn't. Now, let's meet Gaius, our fictional Roman everyman, because every good story needs a protagonist, and history is too cruel to give us real names sometimes. Gaius is a 25-year-old merchant's son, stuck in the middle of Rome's social ladder. Not rich enough to bribe his way into the Senate, not poor enough to beg for bread. He's got a toga that's slightly too short, a crush on his best friend Lucius, and a constant fear that his dad will marry him off to some senator's daughter with a face like a disappointed mule. Gaius is our guide through this chaotic world, and let me tell you, his life is about to get messier than a chariot race in the rain. Gaius wakes up every morning to the sound of roosters and his neighbors screaming about stolen olives. His day starts with a trip to the Forum, where Rome's heart beats loudest. The Forum is like a modern-day mall, but instead of Starbucks, you've got priests sacrificing goats, and instead of influencers, you've got politicians yelling about Carthage. It's also where Gaius spots Lucius, a freedman who works as a scribe for a grumpy old senator. Lucius is charming, witty, and has eyes that could make a Vestal virgin reconsider her vows. The problem? Lucius is lower on the social ladder than Gaius, which means any relationship between them comes with a side of scandal. In Rome, love wasn't blind, it was judgmental and carried a clipboard. Homosexuality in this era wasn't illegal, but it was heavily policed by social norms. If Gaius wanted to pursue Lucius, he'd have to navigate a minefield of expectations. First, he'd need to prove he was the dominant one in the relationship, because gods forbid anyone think he's soft. Second, he'd have to keep it discreet, because while everyone was doing it, nobody was supposed to talk about it. Hypocrisy was Rome's favorite pastime, right after war and complaining about taxes. Gaius and Lucius's flirtation starts innocently enough. Shared glances over a jug of watered-down wine, a brush of hands while passing a scroll. But in Rome, nothing stays innocent for long. Enter Marcus, Gaius's cousin, a wannabe poet with a beard that looks like it's trying to escape his face. Marcus is the kind of guy who thinks he's deep because he cries during thunderstorms. He's also insanely jealous of Gaius's friendship with Lucius because Marcus has his own designs on the scribe. Drama? Oh, it's brewing faster than a pot of garum, Rome's infamous fish sauce. To understand this love triangle, we need to zoom out and look at how Rome treated same-sex relationships in practice. The elite had it easiest. Senators and generals could take male lovers, usually younger men or slaves, without much backlash. as long as they stayed in control. These relationships often doubled as mentorships, where an older man would guide a younger one in exchange for, well, you know. It was called the Greek way because Romans loved blaming their naughtier habits on their neighbors. The Greeks, meanwhile, were probably rolling their eyes from Athens. For guys like Gaius, who weren't elite but weren't slaves either, things were trickier. Middle-class Romans had to balance desire with reputation. If Gaius got too cozy with Lucius, rumors would spread faster than a plague. His dad might disown him, his business deals could collapse, and he'd end up selling knockoff sandals in a back alley. Worse, if Marcus decided to snitch, and Marcus loved snitching, Gaius could face public humiliation. In Rome, your honor was your currency, and losing it was like going bankrupt in a city where everyone's a loan shark. Let's not forget the slaves, because Rome's story is incomplete without them. Slaves made up a huge chunk of the population, and they had zero say in who they slept with. Male slaves were often used by their masters for sex, and refusing wasn't an option unless you fancied a one-way trip to the mines. It's a grim reminder that Rome's so-called sexual freedom was built on the backs of people who had none. Gaius, to his credit, isn't that kind of guy, but he's still complicit in a system where power dictates everything. He buys his wine from a slave, his bread from a slave, and his heart is racing for a freedman who's only one bad day away from being re-enslaved. Back to our love triangle. One night, Gaius, Lucius, and Marcus end up at a dinner party thrown by a shady merchant named Quintus. Quintus is the kind of guy who'd sell his own mother for a better seat at the Colosseum. His parties are legendary for their excess. Think platters of peacock tongues, musicians playing lyres, and enough wine to drown a legion. It's also where Rome's social rules get blurry. At Quintus's house, anything goes, as long as you don't get caught. Gaius is nervous. He's never been to a party this wild, and his toga keeps riding up. Lucius, meanwhile, is in his element, charming everyone with stories about his old master's terrible handwriting. Marcus is sulking in a corner, clutching a cup of wine and muttering about the decline of Roman virtue. The tension is thicker than the smog over the Tiber River. As the night wears on, the wine flows, and inhibitions vanish like a senator's promises. Gaius and Lucius steal a moment alone in the garden, where the air smells of jasmine and regret. They talk about everything, dreams of leaving Rome, the stars, the absurdity of wearing wool in summer. For a moment, it feels like they're the only two people in the world. Then Marcus stumbles in, drunk and furious, accusing Gaius of betraying their family's honor. It's a scene straight out of a Roman soap opera, complete with yelling and spilled wine. Quintus, ever the opportunist, sees the drama and decides to make it worse. He proposes a game, a poetry contest where the winner gets to claim Lucius for the night. It's a cruel, twisted idea, but the crowd loves it. Gaius is horrified, Lucius is trapped, and Marcus is suddenly sober enough to think he's Ovid. The contest begins, and it's a disaster. Marcus's poem is a rambling mess about wolves and destiny. Gaius, who's never written a poem in his life, stumbles through something about the moon and freedom. Lucius, forced to play along, recites a few lines about survival that hit harder than a gladiator's sword. The crowd picks Lucius as the winner, because of course they do. He's the only one who didn't embarrass himself, but the victory is hollow. Quintus laughs, Marcus storms off, and Gaius is left wondering if love is worth the cost. As the party winds down, Gaius and Lucius share a quiet moment. Lucius admits he's tired of being a pawn in other people's games. Gaius promises to protect him, but they both know promises in Rome are as fragile as clay pots. The night ends with them walking home under a sky that feels too big for their problems. Gaius's heart is full, but his head is spinning. He's just survived his first taste of Rome's underbelly, and it's only going to get worse. This is ancient Rome, after all, a city where love is a battlefield, and the casualties are always human. Stay tuned for part 2, where Gaius learns that jealousy, politics, and a bad haircut can ruin more than just a good day. Welcome back to the chaos of ancient Rome, where the wine is sour, the streets are a health hazard, and Gaius, our hapless hero, is still trying to navigate love, lust, and the ever-present threat of social ruin. If you thought part 1 was a wild ride, buckle up, because the city doesn't slow down, it just throws more knives into the mix. We're diving into part 2 of the untold history of homosexuality in ancient Rome, saga of betrayal, ambition, and the kind of drama that makes you glad you're watching from the 21st century. Picture Gaius, now a week after that disastrous poetry contest at Quintus's party, waking up with a headache and a heart full of regrets. His crush on Lucius, the charming freedman scribe, is stronger than ever, but so is the gossip swirling around them. Marcus, Gaius's jealous cousin, hasn't forgiven him for stealing Lucius's attention, and Rome's rumor mill is churning faster than a millstone grinding wheat. This is a city where whispers can kill reputations quicker than a gladiator's sword, and Gaius is about to learn that lesson the hard way. Let's set the scene. It's still 200 BCE, and Rome is buzzing with the energy of a republic on the rise. The Second Punic War is looming, and everyone's talking about Hannibal and his elephants like they're the ancient equivalent of a viral TikTok trend. But for Gaius, the real battle is closer to home. His dad, a gruff merchant named Publius, has noticed Gaius's distracted behavior and is starting to suspect something's up. Publius isn't a monster, but he's a Roman through and through, which means he values family honor above all else, except maybe a good deal on olive oil. If he finds out Gaius is mooning over a freedman, it's not just a scandal, it's a financial disaster. Gaius's family relies on alliances with wealthier merchants, and those alliances don't survive rumors of unmanly behavior. In Rome, love doesn't conquer all, it gets crushed under the weight of tradition. Gaius's days are spent dodging his dad's questions and trying to catch Lucius at the Forum. Lucius, meanwhile, is dealing with his own problems. As a freedman, he's technically free, but freedom in Rome comes with an asterisk. He's still beholden to his former master, a senator named Decimus, who treats him like a fancy pet. Decimus is old, rich, and has a laugh like a dying goat, but he's also powerful enough to ruin Lucius's life with a snap of his fingers. Lucius's job as a scribe keeps him close to Decimus, which means he's constantly walking a tightrope between obedience and independence. When Gaius shows up with his awkward smiles and slightly too short toga, Lucius is torn between flattered and terrified. A relationship with Gaius could be a lifeline, or a noose. To make matters worse, Marcus is back and he's upgraded from sulky poet to full-blown schemer. Marcus has decided that if he can't have Lucius, nobody can. He's been cozying up to a group of young patricians who fancy themselves Rome's morality police. These guys are the ancient equivalent of keyboard warriors, except instead of tweeting, they spread rumors and ruin lives. Marcus tells them about Gaius and Lucius, exaggerating every detail until it sounds like the two are hosting nightly orgies in the Forum. The patricians eat it up because nothing spices up a boring Roman afternoon like a good scandal. Gaius, blissfully unaware of Marcus's plotting, decides it's time to take a risk. He invites Lucius to a quiet dinner at his family's house, hoping to finally confess his feelings. It's a bold move in a city where privacy is as rare as a clean public bath. Gaius spends all day preparing, bribing a slave to cook something edible, hiding his dad's tacky wine jugs, and practicing his speech in front of a mirror. He's nervous, sweaty, and convinced he's gonna trip over his own toga, but for once, he feels alive. Lucius arrives, looking like he just stepped out of a sculptor's dream, and for a moment, everything's perfect. They talk, they laugh, and the world outside their little dining room fades away. Then Publius comes home early. Publius walks in, sees Lucius, and immediately smells trouble. He's not dumb. He knows what a young man inviting another young man over means, especially when the wine's out and the lamps are dim. He doesn't yell, which is worse. Instead, he gives Gaius a look that could curdle milk and politely asks Lucius to leave. Lucius, ever the survivor, bows and slips out, leaving Gaius to face his dad's wrath alone. Publius doesn't beat around the bush. He tells Gaius that rumors are spreading, and if they're true, the family's done for. He's already arranged a betrothal to Claudia, the daughter of a wealthy merchant with a face that's, let's say, an acquired taste. Gaius protests, but Publius cuts him off. In Rome, you don't get to choose love, you choose survival. Gaius is devastated, but he's not ready to give up. He sneaks out that night to find Lucius, determined to make things right. He tracks him down at a tavern near the Subura, Rome's shadiest neighborhood, where the air smells like regret and cheap beer. Lucius is there, nursing a cup of wine and looking like he's carrying the weight of the world. Gaius spills his heart out, telling Lucius he doesn't care about the rumors or his dad or Claudia's unfortunate face. Lucius listens, but his eyes are guarded. He's been burned before, by masters, by lovers, by Rome itself. He tells Gaius that love is a luxury they can't afford, but there's a flicker of hope in his voice, like maybe, just maybe, they could find a way. Their moment is interrupted by Marcus and his patrician posse, who followed Gaius like a pack of wolves sniffing out drama. Marcus accuses them of dishonoring Rome, which is rich coming from a guy who once wrote a poem about his pet pigeon. The patricians jeer, and the tavern crowd starts to turn. In Rome, mob mentality is a sport, and Gaius and Lucius are the main event. They manage to slip out through a back alley, but not before Marcus lands a punch that leaves Gaius with a black eye and a bruised ego. The next day, the rumors hit critical mass. Gaius's name is being whispered in every market stall, and Publius is fielding angry letters from business partners. Lucius, meanwhile, is called to Decimus's villa, where the senator grills him about his associations. Decimus isn't mad, he's amused, which is worse. He offers Lucius a deal: spy on Gaius's family for dirt on their business dealings, and Decimus will protect him from the scandal. Lucius refuses, but it's a hollow victory. He knows Decimus doesn't take no for an answer. Gaius, desperate to salvage his life, decides to confront Marcus. He finds him at the baths of Agrippa, where Rome's elite go to sweat, scheme, and show off. The baths are a steamy maze of marble and gossip, and Marcus is holding court with his patrician friends. Gaius marches up, black eye and all, and calls Marcus out for his betrayal. It's a bad move. Marcus laughs, the patricians smirk, and Gaius realizes he's walked into a trap. Marcus has been spreading lies not just about Gaius's love life, but about his family's business, accusing them of smuggling to dodge taxes. In Rome, that's not just a scandal, it's a death sentence. Gaius storms out, humiliated and furious, but he's not beaten yet. He hatches a plan to clear his name and protect Lucius, but it's going to require help from an unlikely source. Quintus, the shady merchant from Part 1. Quintus owes Gaius a favor after Gaius saved him from a bad deal involving some questionable ostriches. Gaius tracks Quintus down at his warehouse, where he's counting coins and yelling at a slave for dropping a jar of garum. Quintus listens to Gaius's story, cackling like it's the best entertainment he's had all week. He agrees to help, but not out of kindness. Quintus smells profit. He proposes a scheme. They'll host another party, bigger and wilder than the last, and use it to expose Marcus's lies. It's risky, but Gaius is out of options. The party is set for the Ides of March, because of course, it is. Quintus pulls out all the stops, dancers, musicians, and a fountain that somehow spouts wine. Gaius invites everyone who matters, including Marcus, Decimus, and even Claudia, who shows up looking like she's already planning the wedding. Lucius is there too, but he's distant, haunted by Decimus's threats. The plan is simple. Gaius will challenge Marcus to a public debate, using Quintus's connections to plant evidence that Marcus's accusations are baseless. But Rome doesn't do simple. As the party hits its peak, Marcus senses something's up and turns the tables. He announces that Gaius and Lucius are lovers, right in front of Decimus, Publius, and half the city's elite. The crowd gasps. Publius looks like he's about to have a stroke, and Decimus raises an eyebrow like he's watching a particularly spicy play. Gaius freezes, but Lucius steps forward. In a voice that cuts through the chaos, he admits to their friendship, but denies any dishonor. He spins a story about loyalty and virtue that's so convincing, even Marcus looks shaken. The crowd wavers, and for a moment, it seems like they've won. Then Decimus speaks. He congratulates Lucius on his eloquence, but hints that he knows more than he's letting on. The party ends in uneasy silence, with Gaius and Lucius alive but on borrowed time. As they leave, Quintus pulls Gaius aside and warns him. Decimus is playing a bigger game, and they're just pawns. Gaius and Lucius walk home under a moon that feels colder than before. They're still together, but Rome's claws are tightening. Stay tuned for Part 3, where power, politics, and a very angry senator turn Gaius's life into a gladiator match with no rules. Here we are, back in the sweaty, scheming heart of ancient Rome, where Gaius is clinging to his dreams of love like a man holding on to a sinking ship in the Tiber. Part 3 of our untold history of homosexuality in ancient Rome is about to drag us deeper into a world where loyalty is rare, betrayal is breakfast, and survival is just a polite word for dodging knives. This chapter picks up right after that catastrophic party where Marcus aired Gaius and Lucius's dirty laundry. Lucius spun a story to save their skins, and Senator Decimus dropped a cryptic hint that he's got bigger plans. Spoiler alert, in Rome, bigger plans usually mean someone's about to get screwed, metaphorically or otherwise. Gaius is a mess. His black eye from Marcus's tavern punch is fading, but the bruise on his pride is still fresh. He's back in the Forum, trying to sell his dad's overpriced olive oil while dodging glares from merchants who've heard the rumors. Rome's gossip machine is relentless, and Gaius's name is now synonymous with scandal. His dad, Publius, has doubled down on the betrothal to Claudia, whose face is starting to haunt Gaius's nightmares. Claudia's not the problem. She's just a pawn in her own dad's game. But the idea of marrying her feels like signing up for a lifetime of lukewarm porridge. Meanwhile, Lucius is walking a tighter rope than ever. Senator Decimus has him under his thumb, demanding loyalty in exchange for protection. Lucius's refusal to spy on Gaius's family has made him a target, and Decimus isn't the type to let defiance slide. He's the kind of guy who'd smile while feeding you to lions, then write a speech about it. Lucius is still working as Decimus's scribe, copying endless scrolls about grain taxes and military campaigns, but every day feels like a countdown to disaster. Gaius and Lucius meet in secret now, stealing moments in the shadow of Rome's temples or the back alleys of the Suburra. These meetings are equal parts romance and panic attack. Gaius wants to run away, maybe to Gaul, where nobody cares about togas or honor, but Lucius is more practical. He knows Rome doesn't let go of its prey that easily. Their whispered plans are interrupted by the constant threat of being caught, and Gaius is starting to realize that love in Rome is like trying to hug a cactus. It's possible, but it's gonna hurt. Enter a new player, Emilia, a sharp-tongued priestess of Vesta who's been watching this drama unfold like it's her favorite tragic play. Emilia is one of the few women in Rome with real power, but it comes at a cost. She's sworn to chastity, and breaking that vow means being buried alive. Fun times. Emilia knows Lucius from his days as a slave in Decimus's household, and she's got a soft spot for him, probably because he's one of the few people in Rome who doesn't try to mansplain her own religion. She pulls Gaius aside one day at the Temple of Vesta, where the eternal flame burns brighter than Rome's collective ego, and offers him a deal. She'll help clear his name, but he has to do something for her first. Emilia's got dirt on Decimus, letters proving he's been skimming off the top of Rome's grain supply, but she can't act on it herself without risking her position. She needs Gaius to deliver the letters to a rival senator, Titus, who's itching to take Decimus down. It's a dangerous job because if Decimus finds out, Gaius is toast. But Emilia's offering something Gaius can't refuse, her influence to quash the rumors about him and Lucius. Gaius takes the deal because what's one more bad decision in a life full of them? He sneaks the letters to Titus, a pompous senator with a wig that looks like it's plotting its own rebellion. Titus is thrilled, not because he cares about justice, but because ruining Decimus means more power for him. Rome's politics are a snake pit, and Gaius is starting to feel like a mouse. Meanwhile, Marcus is still out there, stirring the pot like a chef with a vendetta. He's upgraded his smear campaign, accusing Gaius's family of not just smuggling, but treason. A charge that could get them all exiled or worse. Marcus has no proof, but in Rome, proof is optional if you've got enough friends with loud mouths. Publius is furious, threatening to disown Gaius unless he fixes this mess. Claudia's dad is starting to rethink the betrothal, which is the only good news Gaius has heard all week. Gaius and Lucius decide they need to confront the source of their problems, Decimus. It's a suicidal plan, but desperation makes you do stupid things. They arrange a meeting at Decimus's villa, under the pretense of Lucius delivering a report. The villa is a maze of marble and excess, with slaves scurrying around like ants and statues that cost more than Gaius's entire family fortune. Decimus greets them with a smile that's all teeth, like a shark who's just spotted lunch. He knows exactly why they're there, and he's ready to play. Decimus offers them a deal. He'll clear their names and protect Gaius's family from Marcus's accusations, but only if Lucius agrees to become his companion. It's a polite way of saying mistress, and it makes Gaius's blood boil. Lucius, ever the pragmatist, considers it for a heartbeat because survival is his default setting. But Gaius shuts it down, declaring that they'll find another way. Decimus laughs because in Rome, there's no other way when a senator wants something. The meeting ends with Decimus giving them an ultimatum: comply, or he'll make sure Marcus's treason charges stick. Gaius and Lucius leave the villa shaken, realizing they've just poked a lion with a very short stick. They turn to Quintus, the shady merchant, for help again, because at this point, he's the only one who seems to enjoy this chaos. Quintus has a new scheme, a public spectacle at the Circus Maximus, where Gaius can challenge Marcus in front of all of Rome. The idea is to turn the treason accusations back on Marcus, using Titus's influence and Aemilia's letters to expose Decimus's corruption as a bonus. It's a long shot, but Quintus loves long shots. They're great for betting. The day of the spectacle arrives, and the Circus Maximus is packed with sweaty, screaming Romans, betting on chariot races and eating questionable street food. Gaius is terrified, but Lucius is by his side, whispering words of courage that sound suspiciously like, "Don't screw this up." Quintus has bribed half the crowd to cheer for Gaius, because in Rome, even justice is pay to play. Marcus takes the stage, spouting his usual nonsense about honor and Rome's decline, but Gaius is ready. He steps forward, holding up Aemilia's letters, and accuses Marcus of lying to protect Decimus's crimes. The crowd roars because nothing gets Romans going like a good plot twist. Titus, smelling victory, backs Gaius up, revealing Decimus's grain scam to the masses. For a moment, it looks like Gaius has won. The crowd is on his side, Marcus is speechless, and even Publius looks mildly impressed. But Rome doesn't do happy endings. Decimus arrives, flanked by his own posse of loyalists, and turns the tables. He accuses Titus of forging the letters and Gaius of being a lovesick fool who's dragging his family into ruin. The crowd, fickle as ever, starts to waver. Lucius tries to intervene, but Decimus's guards grab him, claiming he's a runaway slave who never earned his freedom. It's a lie, but Decimus has the power to make it stick. Gaius lunges to protect Lucius, and the scene descends into chaos. Fists flying, togas ripping, and the crowd cheering like it's a gladiator match. Quintus, ever the opportunist, slips away with his profits, leaving Gaius and Lucius to fend for themselves. They escape the circus, battered but alive, and hide in Aemilia's temple, because even Decimus won't mess with the Vestal virgins. Aemilia, annoyed but sympathetic, gives them a lecture about how love is a terrible career choice in Rome. She promises to pull some strings, but warns that Decimus is too powerful to take down completely. Gaius and Lucius are safe for now, but they're running out of allies and options. As they sit in the temple, surrounded by the flicker of the eternal flame, Gaius realizes that Rome isn't just a city. It's a machine that grinds up anyone who dares to feel too much. Lucius, bruised but defiant, takes his hand and says they'll fight another day. They've survived the circus, but Decimus is still out there, and Marcus is probably already writing a terrible poem about his triumph. The stakes are higher, the knives are sharper, and Rome is watching. Stay tuned for part 4, where Gaius and Lucius face their final stand, and Rome decides whether love is worth saving or sacrificing. Here we are, at the final act of our sordid saga in ancient Rome, where Gaius and Lucius are battered, bruised, and still stupidly in love in a city that chews up dreamers and spits out cynics. This is part 4 of the untold history of homosexuality in ancient Rome. Finale that's equal parts heartbreak, defiance, and the kind of absurd chaos only Rome can deliver. We left our boys hiding in the Temple of Vesta, courtesy of Aemilia, the priestess who's had enough of their drama but can't help rooting for them. The Circus Maximus showdown was a disaster. Decimus twisted the knife, Marcus got away with his lies, and Lucius is now dodging a fake slave charge that could strip him of his fragile freedom. Welcome to Rome, where the only thing more dangerous than love is hope. Gaius is done playing defense. He spent months dodging rumors, fists, and his dad's lectures about Claudia, the betrothed he's never going to marry. His family's business is crumbling under Marcus's treason accusations, and Publius is one bad day away from selling Gaius to a gladiator school just to save face. Lucius, meanwhile, is a ghost of himself. The weight of Decimus's threats and Rome's relentless cruelty is wearing him down, but he's still got that spark, the one that made Gaius fall for him in the first place. They're holed up in Amelia's temple, surrounded by the flicker of the eternal flame, plotting their last stand. Amelia, ever the voice of reason with a side of sarcasm, tells them they've got two choices, run or fight. Running sounds nice. Maybe they could sneak to Egypt, where the Nile smells better than the Tiber, and nobody cares about Roman gossip. But running means abandoning their families, their honor, and any chance of proving Rome wrong. Fighting means taking on Decimus, Marcus, and half the city's elite, with odds worse than a one-legged man in a chariot race. Gaius, fueled by love and a dangerous amount of optimism, chooses to fight. Their plan hinges on one last ally, Titus, the rival senator who's still itching to take Decimus down. Titus is no hero. He's just another power-hungry patrician with a bad wig, but he's their best shot. Amelia arranges a secret meeting at the Temple of Jupiter, where the air smells of incense and ambition. Titus listens to Gaius's story, smirking like he's watching a particularly entertaining dogfight. He agrees to help, but only if Gaius and Lucius can deliver something bigger than Amelia's letters, proof that Decimus is plotting against the Senate itself. It's a tall order, but Titus promises to use his influence to clear their names and protect Lucius's freedom if they pull it off. The catch? They've got 3 days before Decimus drags Lucius to court on the slave charge. Gaius and Lucius turn to the only person crazy enough to help with a scheme this reckless, Quintus, the shady merchant who's probably already betting on their failure. Quintus is lounging in his warehouse, surrounded by jars of garum and a pile of coins he's borrowed from someone else's business. He cackles when Gaius explains the plan, because nothing says entertainment like two desperate lovers trying to outsmart a senator. Quintus knows a slave in Decimus's household, a guy named Cyrus who's got a knack for overhearing things. Cyrus is risking his life by helping, but Quintus bribes him with a promise of freedom, assuming they all survive. Cyrus sneaks them into Decimus's villa at night, disguised as delivery boys hauling amphorae of wine. The villa is a fortress of luxury, with mosaics that mock their poverty and slaves who look like they've forgotten how to smile. Cyrus leads them to Decimus's study, where the senator keeps his most incriminating scrolls. Gaius and Lucius search frantically, their hearts pounding louder than a war drum, while Cyrus keeps watch. They find what they need, a letter from Decimus to a general in Carthage, hinting at a deal to undermine Rome's war effort for a fat payout. It's treason, plain and simple, and it's enough to bring Decimus down, if they can get it to Titus without dying. Of course, nothing in Rome is that easy. Cyrus hears footsteps, and they barely escape the study before Decimus's guards burst in. The villa turns into a maze of panic. Guards shouting, dogs barking, and Gaius tripping over his own toga like it's his job. They make it out, but not before one of Decimus's men spots Lucius. By morning, Decimus knows someone's been in his study, and he's got a pretty good guess who. The clock is ticking louder than ever. Gaius and Lucius deliver the letter to Titus, who's so delighted he almost forgets to be condescending. He promises to present the evidence at the Senate's next meeting, but warns them to lay low. Low isn't an option, because Decimus is already moving. He sends his thugs to Gaius's house, where they rough up Publius and smash half the family's olive oil jars. Publius, for once, doesn't blame Gaius. He's too busy cursing Decimus's name. It's a small victory, but it means Gaius's dad is finally on his side, even if it's just out of spite. Meanwhile, Marcus is spiraling. His treason accusations against Gaius's family aren't sticking, and his patrician friends are starting to ditch him for less embarrassing allies. In a desperate bid to stay relevant, Marcus decides to confront Gaius one last time. He tracks him to the Subura, where Gaius and Lucius are hiding in a dingy tavern. Marcus storms in, waving a dagger and ranting about honor, but he's no match for two guys who've survived Rome's worst. Gaius disarms him, Lucius lands a punch, and the tavern crowd cheers, because they'll cheer for anything if it's free. Marcus flees, humiliated, and for the first time, Gaius feels like he might actually win this. The Senate meeting arrives, and Rome's elite gather like vultures circling a fresh corpse. Titus takes the floor, holding up Decimus's treasonous letter, and spinning a tale of corruption that has even the most jaded senators gasping. Decimus tries to fight back, accusing Titus of jealousy and Gaius of being a lovesick troublemaker, but the evidence is damning. The Senate votes to exile Decimus, stripping him of his wealth and power. It's a rare moment of justice in a city that usually eats its own. Gaius and Lucius watch from the shadows, knowing they can't take credit without painting targets on their backs. With Decimus gone, the slave charge against Lucius collapses, and Titus, true to his word, uses his influence to quash the rumors about Gaius's family. Publius even calls off the betrothal to Claudia, mostly because her dad's business is tanking without Decimus's patronage. It's not a fairy tale ending, but it's as close as Rome gets. Gaius and Lucius are free, sort of. Rome's still Rome, with its gossip, its hierarchies, and its endless hunger for drama. They decide to leave the city not for Egypt, but for a quiet town in Campania, where the air is cleaner and nobody cares who you love as long as you pay your taxes. Quintus throws them a going-away party, because he'll throw a party for anything if there's profit in it. Aemilia shows up, rolling her eyes but secretly proud, and slips them a pouch of coins from the temple's surplus. Even Publius sends a grudging letter, wishing Gaius well and reminding him not to ruin the family name again. As they walk away from Rome, the city's skyline fading behind them, Gaius and Lucius hold hands, not defiantly, but quietly, like two people who've earned a moment of peace. They've survived a world where love was a battlefield, where power trumped passion, and where every step forward came with a cost. Rome didn't change for them, but they changed Rome, just a little, by refusing to break. The history books won't remember Gaius and Lucius. They don't record the stories of ordinary men who dared to love in a city that worshipped control. But their story matters, because it's a reminder that even in the darkest corners of history, there were people fighting for something real. Homosexuality in ancient Rome wasn't a label. It was a lived experience, messy and raw, shaped by a society that gave with one hand and took with the other. Gaius and Lucius are gone, but their defiance echoes like a whisper in the ruins of a city that thought it could outlast everything. Thanks for sticking with this wild ride through Rome's underbelly. Drop a comment about what you thought, and let me know if you want more tales from history's forgotten corners. Until next time, keep dodging the knives. Hey guys, picture this. You're in ancient Greece where the sun is scorching. The philosophers are arguing about nothing, and your best chance at survival is knowing which god to bribe with a goat. Welcome to the untold history of homosexuality in ancient Greece, a chaotic, absurd, and sometimes beautiful mess of love, power, and enough drama to make a tragedian blush. This isn't your dusty textbook version of history. It's a wild ride through a world where passion was a currency, and the only thing sharper than a Spartan spear was the gossip in Athens. Buckle up for a saga that'll make you laugh, wince, and thank the gods you're watching from the future. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. It's 450 BCE, and Greece is a patchwork of city-states that can't decide if they're allies, enemies, or just annoyed with each other's fashion choices. Athens is the brainy kid showing off its democracy, Sparta's over there flexing its abs, and everyone else is just trying not to get invaded. Homosexuality? It's not just accepted, it's practically a cultural institution. But don't start picturing pride parades with olive wreaths. In Greece, same-sex relationships were tangled up in power, status, and a whole lot of rules nobody wrote down, but everyone followed. Love was less about warm fuzzies and more about who's got the upper hand in a game of social Jenga. Meet Ariston, our fictional Athenian everyman, because history loves to lose the names of regular folks. Ariston's a 24-year-old potter's son with a knack for sculpting vases and a crush on his friend Nicias, a hoplite soldier who's got biceps like a god and a smile that could start a war. Ariston's life is a daily grind of clay, sweat, and dodging his mom's attempts to marry him off to some merchant's daughter who smells like garlic. He's our guide through this sun-baked, scandal-soaked world, and trust me, his story's about to get messier than a symposium after the third jug of wine. Ariston wakes up to the sound of roosters and his neighbor yelling about a stolen amphora. His day starts in the Agora, Athens' bustling marketplace, where you can buy olives, gossip, or a philosopher's opinion for the price of a loaf. It's also where he spots Nicias, fresh from training, looking like he just walked out of a Homeric epic. Nicias is a free citizen, but he's not elite. His family's got just enough land to avoid starvation, which puts him and Ariston on roughly the same rung of Athens' shaky social ladder. The problem? Nicias is being mentored by Theron, a wealthy aristocrat who thinks he's Socrates but with better hair. In Greece, mentorship was code for a relationship where an older man guided a younger one, usually with a side of romance. It was respectable, even encouraged, as long as it followed the script. The older guy's the boss, the younger guy's the student, and nobody talks about feelings unless they're drunk. Ariston's got no mentor, no status, and no chance of competing with Theron's money, but he's got heart and a stubborn streak wider than the Aegean. Homosexuality in ancient Greece wasn't about labels like gay or straight. It was about roles, active versus passive, dominant versus submissive, and the rules were stricter than a Spartan's workout routine. For free men like Ariston and Nicias, pursuing a same-sex relationship meant navigating a maze of expectations. You could love who you wanted, but only if you did it the right way, and the right way depended on your city-state. In Athens, it was all about intellectual bonding and poetic vibes. In Sparta, it was more like, love me, but also let's wrestle in the dirt. Everywhere, though, the golden rule was clear: don't lose your honor, or you'll be selling fish guts in the agora by next week. Ariston's crush on Nicias starts innocently, shared glances over a pottery stall, a laugh during a festival for Dionysus. But innocence in Greece lasts about as long as a cheap tunic. Enter Cleon, Ariston's childhood friend turned rival, a wannabe poet with a beard that looks like it's staging a protest. Cleon's got his own designs on Nicias, mostly because he wants Theron's attention and thinks stealing Nicias is the way to get it. Cleon's the kind of guy who'd write an ode to his own ego and cry when nobody claps. He's also got a knack for stirring up trouble, and he's about to make Ariston's life harder than a philosopher's riddle. To understand this mess, let's zoom out. Greek society was obsessed with hierarchy. At the top were the elite men, landowners, politicians, and guys who could afford to bribe the Oracle of Delphi. They could have lovers of any gender, as long as they stayed dominant and didn't flaunt it too much. For middle-class guys like Ariston, things were trickier. You could pursue a guy like Nicias, but you better keep it classy, or the Agora's gossip mill would grind you into dust. Women, slaves, and foreigners? They had no say in the matter. Slaves, especially, were at the mercy of their master's desires, and refusing wasn't an option unless you wanted a one-way trip to the quarries. It's a grim reality check. Greece's romantic ideals were built on a foundation of exploitation. Ariston's not that kind of guy, but he's still part of a system where power is everything, and love is a risky side hustle. Back to our story. One night, Ariston, Nicias, and Cleon end up at a symposium thrown by Theron. The kind of party where wine flows like the Styx and everyone's pretending to be deep. Theron's house is a shrine to excess, marble floors, golden cups, and a lyre player who's clearly regretting his life choices. Symposia were where Athens' elite flex their brains and their charm, but for guys like Ariston, they're a minefield. He's only there because Nicias invited him, and Nicias is only there because Theron insists on showing him off like a prize horse. Ariston's out of his depth, clutching a cup of wine and trying not to spill it on his borrowed chiton. Nicias is dazzling, trading witty banter with Theron while Ariston sweats through his clothes. Cleon, meanwhile, is lurking like a vulture, ready to pounce on any misstep. The symposium takes a turn when Theron proposes a game, a debate about love, because of course the Greeks would turn emotions into a competitive sport. The winner gets to dedicate a poem to anyone in the room. It's a setup. Theron's fishing for flattery, and Cleon's ready to deliver. Ariston, who'd rather be glazing pots than debating, gets roped in anyway. Nicias, caught in the middle, looks like he'd rather be fighting Persians than dealing with this nonsense. The debate is a disaster. Cleon's speech is a flowery mess about Aphrodite and destiny, earning polite claps and Theron's smug approval. Ariston, fueled by wine and desperation, stumbles through a speech about love as freedom, which sounds great until he accidentally insults Theron's taste in poetry. The room goes silent, and Nicias shoots him a look that's half pity, half, "What are you doing?" Theron, ever the gracious host, laughs it off but makes a mental note to ruin Ariston later. Nicias saves the night with a speech so clever it could have come from Plato, winning the poem dedication and choosing, surprise, Ariston. It's a small victory, but it lights a fire in Ariston's heart and a fuse under Cleon's jealousy. As the symposium winds down, Ariston and Nicias steal a moment on Theron's balcony, overlooking a city that's as beautiful as it is brutal. They talk about dreams, Ariston's of a quiet life making pots, Nicias's of surviving long enough to retire from soldiering. For a moment, it feels like they could outrun Greece's rules. Then Cleon interrupts, drunk and furious, accusing Ariston of stealing Nicias from Theron. It's a scene straight out of a Greek tragedy, complete with shouting and a spilled wine jug. Theron overhears, and his smile says he's already plotting revenge. The night ends with Ariston walking home alone, his heart full but his head spinning. He's just pissed off one of Athens' most powerful men, and Cleon's out for blood. Nicias is caught in the middle, and Greece's unforgiving rules are closing in. This is ancient Greece, where love is a battlefield, and the casualties are always human. Stay tuned for part 2, where Ariston learns that jealousy, politics, and a bad poem can ruin more than just a good night. Welcome back to the sun-scorched, scandal-soaked streets of ancient Greece, where Ariston's heart is racing, his pottery business is wobbling, and Athens is serving up drama hotter than a blacksmith's forge. We're diving into part 2 of the untold history of homosexuality in ancient Greece, a saga of love, betrayal, and the kind of absurd social rules that make you glad you're not wearing a chiton in 450 BCE. Last time, Ariston, our love-struck potter's son, made a fool of himself at Theron's symposium, accidentally insulted the richest guy in the room, and sparked a feud with Cleon, the poet with a beard as tragic as his verses. Nicias, the soldier with a smile that could launch 1,000 ships, picked Ariston for a poem dedication. But now, they're both caught in a web of jealousy and power plays. Buckle up, because Athens doesn't do chill, and this story's about to get messier than a spilled jug of olive oil. Ariston's life is unraveling faster than a cheap tunic. His mom, Lysandra, has noticed he's been moping around the workshop, sculpting vases with suspiciously romantic designs. Think entwined laurel wreaths and suspiciously buff hoplites. She's doubling down on her plan to marry him off to Chloe, a merchant's daughter whose dowry could save their business, but whose personality is as exciting as stale bread. Lysandra is not cruel, just practical. Athens isn't kind to families who can't pay their debts, and Ariston's dreamy stares aren't helping. Meanwhile, the agora's buzzing with whispers about Ariston's symposium blunder. Theron, the aristocratic mentor to Nicias, hasn't forgiven Ariston for mocking his poetry, and in Athens, grudges are a competitive sport. Theron's got money, influence, and a knack for making enemies disappear without breaking a sweat. Ariston's not important enough to kill, but he's definitely annoying enough to ruin. Nicias, stuck in the middle, is torn. He's a hoplite trained to face Persian spears, but navigating Athens' social battlefield is another beast. His mentorship with Theron is supposed to secure his future, maybe a promotion, maybe a plot of land, but it comes with strings, and those strings are starting to feel like chains. Nicias likes Ariston's earnestness, his clumsy charm, but getting too close could tank his reputation. In Greece, a soldier's honor is his shield, and gossip is sharper than any sword. Cleon, meanwhile, has gone full villain. He's spreading rumors that Ariston's not just chasing Nicias, but disrespecting Theron's mentorship, which in Athens is like spitting on the Parthenon. Cleon's not in love with Nicias. He's in love with the idea of Theron's approval, and he'll burn Ariston's life down to get it. He's teamed up with a group of young aristocrats who fancy themselves the guardians of Athenian virtue. These guys are the ancient equivalent of influencers with too much time, stirring up trouble because it's more fun than debating philosophy. They're calling Ariston unmanly, a label that's social poison in a city obsessed with masculinity. Ariston, blissfully unaware of how deep Cleon's scheming goes, decides to take a risk. He invites Nicias to a quiet dinner at his family's workshop, hoping to confess his feelings. It's a bold move in a city where privacy is as rare as a sober poet. Ariston spends all day preparing, bribing a neighbor for decent wine, sweeping clay dust off the floor, and practicing his speech to a stack of pots. He's nervous, sweaty, and convinced he's going to choke on an olive pit, but for once, he feels alive. Nicias shows up looking like a statue of Apollo come to life, and for a moment, everything's perfect. They talk about the stars, the absurdity of Athenian politics, and how Theron's latest poem sounds like a goat wrote it. Then Lysandra walks in. Lysandra sees Nicias, smells romance, and goes full Athenian mom mode. She doesn't yell. She just gives Ariston a look that could curdle wine and politely asks Nicias to leave. Nicias, ever the diplomat, bows and slips out, leaving Ariston to face a lecture about duty, honor, and how Chloe's dowry could buy them a new kiln. Lysandra's not wrong. Ariston's family is one bad season away from poverty, but her words hit like a slingstone. She's already invited Chloe's family for a betrothal dinner, and Ariston's dreams of Nicias are starting to feel like a luxury he can't afford. Devastated but stubborn, Ariston sneaks out to find Nicias. He tracks him to a gymnasium near the Agora, where Athens' men go to wrestle, philosophize, and show off their suspiciously oiled abs. Nicias is sparring, looking like he's fighting his own demons as much as his opponent. Ariston spills his heart out, telling Nicias he doesn't care about Theron, Cleon, or Chloe's dowry. Nicias listens, his eyes guarded like a soldier sizing up a battlefield. He admits he feels something too, but warns that Athens doesn't let men like them just love and live. It's a moment of raw hope, fragile as a clay pot fresh from the kiln. Then Cleon and his aristocratic posse show up, because of course they do. Cleon accuses Ariston of corrupting Nicias, which is rich coming from a guy whose poetry corrupts good taste. The aristocrats jeer, and the gymnasium crowd starts to turn. In Athens, mob mentality is an art form, and Ariston's the canvas. Nicias steps in, telling Cleon to back off, but it only fuels the fire. Cleon lands a cheap shot, leaving Ariston with a bruised jaw and a burning need for revenge. They escape, but the damage is done. Cleon's rumors are now shouts, and Ariston's name is mud. The next day, the gossip hits critical mass. Ariston's vases aren't selling, and Lysandra is getting snide comments at the Agora. Nicias, meanwhile, is summoned by Theron, who's heard the rumors and isn't amused. Theron doesn't care about Nicias' heart. He cares about his own reputation. He offers Nicias a deal: ditch Ariston, stay loyal, and Theron will secure him a cushy military post. Defy him, and Nicias can kiss his career goodbye. Nicias refuses, but it's a hollow victory. Theron's not the type to take no for an answer, and Nicias knows it. Ariston, desperate to fight back, decides to confront Cleon. He finds him at the theater of Dionysus, where Athens' elite go to cry over tragedies and gossip during intermissions. Cleon's holding court with his aristocrat friends, reciting a poem about virtue that's as convincing as a used chariot salesman. Ariston marches up, bruised and all, and calls Cleon out for his lies. It's a terrible idea. Cleon laughs, the aristocrats smirk, and Ariston realizes he's walked into a trap. Cleon's been spreading lies not just about Ariston's love life, but about his family's business, accusing them of selling shoddy pots to temples, a charge that could get them blacklisted. In Athens, your reputation is your currency, and Ariston's is counterfeit. Furious but not beaten, Ariston hatches a plan to clear his name and protect Nicias. He turns to an unlikely ally, Phaedra, a hetaira, think high-class courtesan, who's got dirt on half of Athens' elite. Phaedra owes Ariston's dad a favor after he fixed her favorite vase for free. Ariston finds her at her house, where the air smells of perfume and ambition. Phaedra listens to his story, cackling like it's the best comedy she's seen all year. She agrees to help, but not out of kindness. She sees a chance to stick it to Theron, who stiffed her on a bill once. Phaedra proposes a scheme, a festival for Apollo where Ariston can challenge Cleon publicly. The idea is to expose Cleon's lies and Theron's pettiness, using Phaedra's connections to plant evidence that Cleon's been taking bribes to smear Ariston's family. It's risky, but Ariston's out of options. The festival is set for the next full moon, because Greece loves its dramatic timing. Phaedra pulls strings, musicians, priests, and a crowd primed for scandal. Ariston invites everyone who matters, including Cleon, Theron, and even Chloe, who shows up with her dad looking like she's already picked out the wedding pottery. Nicias is there too, but he's distant, haunted by Theron's ultimatum. The plan is simple. Ariston will call out Cleon during a poetry contest, using Phaedra's evidence to prove his innocence. But Athens doesn't do simple. As the festival peaks, Cleon senses a trap and strikes first. He announces Ariston and Nicias' dishonorable relationship to the crowd, right in front of Theron and half the city's elite. The crowd gasps. Lysandra looks like she's about to faint, and Theron's smirk could cut glass. Ariston freezes, but Nikia steps forward. In a voice that carries like a war cry, he admits their friendship but denies any shame, spinning a story about loyalty and honor that's so compelling even Cleon looks shaken. The crowd wavers, and for a moment it seems like they've won. Then Theron speaks. He praises Nikias' eloquence, but hints that he knows more than he's saying. The festival ends in uneasy silence, with Ariston and Nikias alive but on borrowed time. As they leave, Phaedra pulls Ariston aside and warns him. Theron's playing a bigger game, and they're just pawns. Ariston and Nikias walk home under a sky that feels too vast for their troubles. They're still together, but Athens' claws are tightening. Stay tuned for part 3, where power, politics, and a very angry aristocrat turn Ariston's life into a tragedy with no chorus. Welcome back to the sun-soaked snake pit of ancient Greece, where Ariston's dreams of love are hanging by a thread thinner than a philosopher's patience. We're diving into part 3 of the untold history of homosexuality in ancient Greece, a tale of passion, betrayal, and the kind of social tightrope that makes tightrope walking look like a stroll. Last time, Ariston and Nikias barely survived the festival for Apollo, where Cleon aired their dishonorable relationship to a crowd of gawking Athenians. Nikias' quick thinking saved them from immediate ruin, but Theron, the aristocratic puppet master, is plotting something nastier than a bad batch of wine. Athens is a city where love is a gamble, and the house always wins. Ariston's a wreck. His jaws still sore from Cleon's gymnasium punch, and his pottery business is tanking thanks to rumors that his vases are cursed by the gods. Cleon's latest lie, because apparently poetry wasn't enough of a crime. His mom, Lysandra, is one step away from chaining him to Chloe, the merchant's daughter whose dowry is the family's last hope. Lysandra's not heartless, but she's Athenian, which means survival trumps sentimentality. Ariston's vases aren't selling, and the Agora's merchants won't even make eye contact anymore. Nikias, meanwhile, is in deeper trouble. Theron's tightening the screws, threatening to ruin his military career unless he cuts ties with Ariston. Nikias is a hoplite, trained to face death on the battlefield, but Theron's brand of warfare, gossip, influence, and a well-placed bribe is a different beast. Nikias' loyalty to Ariston is wavering, not because he doesn't care, but because Athens doesn't let you care without a cost. He's still meeting Ariston in secret, stealing moments in the olive groves outside the city, but every glance feels like a countdown. The groves are quiet, fragrant with earth and possibility, but even there, Athens' rules cast a long shadow. Enter a new player, Irene, a priestess of Athena who's been watching this drama unfold like it's a play she's half invested in. Irene's got power. Priestesses in Athens are untouchable, even by men like Theron, but she's not exactly a saint. She's known Nikias since he was a kid, back when he'd sneak offerings to Athena's temple to pray for strength. Irene pulls Ariston aside at the Parthenon, where the goddess's statue looms like a reminder that mortals are just divine entertainment. She offers a deal. She's got dirt on Theron, scrolls proving he's been dodging taxes on his olive groves, but she can't use them herself without risking her temple's neutrality. If Ariston delivers the scrolls to a rival aristocrat, Damon, Irene will use her influence to shut down Cleon's rumors. It's a dangerous job, because if Theron catches wind, Ariston's life won't be worth a cracked amphora. Ariston takes the deal because desperation makes you say yes to things that scream bad idea. He sneaks the scrolls to Damon, a slick politician with a smile that's all charm and no soul. Damon's thrilled, not because he cares about justice, but because Theron's downfall means more votes for him in the assembly. Athens' politics are a game of knives, and Ariston's starting to feel like the target. Meanwhile, Cleon's gone from annoying to outright dangerous. He's escalated his smear campaign, accusing Ariston's family of sacrilege, a charge that could get them exiled or worse. Cleon's got no proof, but in Athens, proof is as optional as sandals in summer. Lysandra's furious, threatening to disown Ariston unless he fixes this mess. Chloe's dad is still pushing the betrothal, but even he's starting to waver, because nobody wants to marry into a family cursed by Athena. Ariston and Nikias decide they need to confront Theron directly. It's a reckless plan, like challenging a bull to a staring contest, but they're out of moves. They arrange a meeting at Theron's estate, under the pretense of Nicias delivering a military report. The estate is a fortress of wealth, marble columns, gilded statues, and slaves who move like they're scared of their own shadows. Theron greets them with a smile that could curdle milk, already knowing why they're there. He offers a deal. Nicias can keep his career if he publicly denounces Ariston, and Ariston's family will be spared the sacrilege charge. It's a trap dressed as a lifeline, and it makes Ariston's blood boil. Nicias hesitates because survival is his instinct, but Ariston shuts it down, declaring they'll find another way. Theron laughs because in Athens, another way is just a slower path to ruin. The meeting ends with Theron's ultimatum: comply, or he'll make sure Cleon's charges stick. Ariston and Nicias leave the estate shaken, realizing they've just kicked a hornet's nest. They turn to Phaedra, the Hetaira from Part 2, because she's the only one who thrives in this kind of chaos. Phaedra's lounging in her courtyard, sipping wine and looking like she's already won at life. She's got a new plan, a public debate at the Knicks where Athens' assembly meets to argue about war, taxes, and who's got the best beard. The idea is to expose Cleon's lies and Theron's tax dodging, using Damon's influence and Irene's scrolls to sway the crowd. It's a long shot, but Phaedra loves long shots. They're great for her betting pool. The day of the debate arrives, and the Knicks is packed with sweaty, shouting Athenians, half of whom are there for the free bread. Ariston's terrified, but Nicias is by his side, whispering words that sound like courage but feel like a prayer. Phaedra's bribed half the crowd to cheer for Ariston, because in Athens even truth needs a sponsor. Cleon takes the stage, spouting his usual nonsense about virtue and the gods, but Ariston's ready. He steps forward, holding up Irene's scrolls, and accuses Cleon of fabricating the sacrilege charge to protect Theron's crimes. The crowd roars because Athenians love a good plot twist. Damon backs Ariston up, revealing Theron's tax evasion to the assembly, and for a moment it looks like victory. Even Lysandra, in the crowd, looks almost proud, but Athens doesn't do clean wins. Theron arrives, flanked by his own loyalists, and flips the script. He accuses Damon of forging the scrolls and Ariston of being a lovesick fool who's dragging Nicias into ruin. The crowd, fickle as a summer breeze, starts to waver. Nicias tries to intervene, but Theron's men grab him, claiming he's deserted his military post, a lie that could get him whipped or worse. Ariston lunges to protect Nicias, and the Knicks turns into a brawl. Fists flying, chitons tearing, and the crowd cheering like it's a wrestling match. Phaedra, ever the opportunist, slips away with her winnings, leaving Ariston and Nicias to fend for themselves. They escape the chaos, battered but alive, and hide in Irene's temple, because even Theron won't mess with Athena's priestesses. Irene, annoyed but sympathetic, lectures them about how a love is a terrible investment in Athens. She promises to pull some strings, but warns that Theron's too powerful to take down completely. Ariston and Nicias are safe for now, but they're running out of allies in time. As they sit in the temple, surrounded by the glow of Athena's altars, Ariston realizes Athens isn't just a city. It's a machine that crushes anyone who dares to feel too much. Nicias, bruised but defiant, takes his hand and says they'll fight another day. They've survived the Knicks, but Theron's still out there, and Cleon's probably already writing a terrible ode to his victory. The stakes are higher, the knives are sharper, and Athens is watching. Stay tuned for Part 4, where Ariston and Nicias face their final stand, and Greece decides whether love is worth saving or sacrificing. Here we are, at the final curtain of our sweaty, scandal-drenched epic in ancient Greece, where Ariston and Nicias are clinging to love like it's the last olive in Athens. This is Part 4 of the untold history of homosexuality in ancient Greece. A tale of defiance, heartbreak, and the kind of chaos that makes you glad you're not dodging spears and gossip in 450 BCE. We left our boys hiding in Irene's temple, battered from the Knicks' brawl, where Theron turned their victory into a public humiliation. Cleon's still out there, writing terrible poetry and worse lies, and Theron's grip on Athens is tighter than a Spartan's discipline. Welcome to Greece, where love is a battlefield, and the gods are probably betting on who will break first. Ariston's done running. His pottery business is in ruins. His mom Lysandra's one step away from disowning him, and the betrothal to Chloe is looming like a bad omen. Nicias is in even worse shape. Theron's fake desertion charge could strip him of his hoplite status, leaving him jobless or worse in a city that doesn't forgive failure. They're holed up in the temple of Athena, surrounded by the flicker of sacred lamps, plotting their last stand. Irene, the priestess who's half ally, half exasperated babysitter, tells them they've got two options, flee or fight. Fleeing sounds tempting, maybe Crete, where nobody cares about Athenian drama and the beaches are better. But running means abandoning their families, their honor, and any chance of proving Athens wrong. Fighting means taking on Theron, Cleon, and a city that thrives on crushing rebels. Ariston, fueled by love and a reckless streak wider than the Aegean, chooses to fight. Their plan hinges on one last ally, Damon, the slick politician who's still salivating over Theron's downfall. Damon's no saint. He's just another power-hungry Athenian with a smile sharper than a Xyphos, but he's their best shot. Irene arranges a secret meeting at the temple of Hephaestus, where the air smells of forged smoke and ambition. Damon listens to Ariston's story, smirking like he's watching a chariot crash in slow motion. He agrees to help, but only if they can deliver something bigger than Irene's tax evasion scrolls, proof that Theron's been bribing assembly members to swing votes. It's a tall order, and they've got 2 days before Theron drags Nicias to court on the desertion charge. Ariston and Nicias turn to Phaedra, the hetaira who thrives on chaos like it's her morning wine. Phaedra's lounging in her perfumed courtyard, surrounded by clients who think they're cleverer than they are. She cackles when Ariston explains the plan, because nothing screams entertainment like two desperate lovers trying to outsmart an aristocrat. Phaedra knows a slave in Theron's household, a scribe named Linus who's got a knack for overhearing secrets. Linus is risking everything, but Phaedra bribes him with a promise of coin. Freedom's too risky to promise in Athens. Linus sneaks them into Theron's estate at night, disguised as wine merchants delivering amphorae. The estate is a labyrinth of wealth, mosaics that mock their poverty, statues that cost more than Ariston's life. Linus leads them to Theron's private study, where he keeps his most damning scrolls. Ariston and Nicias search frantically, their hearts pounding louder than a war drum, while Linus keeps watch. They find it, a ledger detailing Theron's bribes to half the assembly, complete with names and amounts. It's enough to bury him, if they can get it to Damon without getting caught. Of course, Athens doesn't do easy. Linus hears footsteps, and they barely escape the study before Theron's guards storm in. The estate turns into a chaos of shouting, barking dogs, and Ariston tripping over his chiton like it's his destiny. They make it out, but not before a guard spots Nicias' face. By dawn, Theron knows someone's been in his study, and he's got a short list of suspects. The clock's ticking faster than a sprinter at the Olympics. Ariston and Nicias deliver the ledger to Damon, who's so thrilled he almost drops his politician's mask. He promises to present it at the next assembly meeting, but warns them to disappear. Theron's not above hiring thugs. Disappearing isn't an option, because Theron's already moving. He sends his men to Ariston's workshop, where they smash every vase and rough up Lysandra's apprentice. Lysandra, for once, doesn't blame Ariston. She's too busy cursing Theron's name. It's a small win, but it means Ariston's mom is finally in his corner, even if it's just out of rage. Meanwhile, Cleon's spiraling. His sacrilege accusations against Ariston's family are falling apart, and his aristocrat friends are ditching him for less toxic allies. In a desperate bid to stay relevant, Cleon tracks Ariston to a tavern in the Ceramicus, Athens' gritty potter's district. Cleon storms in, waving a dagger and ranting about honor, but he's no match for two guys who've survived Athens' worst. Ariston disarms him. Nicias lands a punch, and the tavern crowd cheers because free entertainment beats watered-down wine. Cleon flees, humiliated, and for the first time, Ariston feels like he might actually pull this off. The assembly meeting arrives, and Athens' elite gather like crows over a battlefield. Damon takes the stage, waving Theron's ledger like it's the Golden Fleece. He spins a tale of corruption that has even the most cynical Athenians gasping. Theron tries to fight back, accusing Damon of slander and Ariston of being a lovesick troublemaker, but the ledger's too damning. The assembly votes to ostracize Theron, banishing him for 10 years, a fate worse than death for a man who lives for power. It's a rare moment of justice in a city that usually eats its own. Ariston and Nicias watch from the crowd, knowing they can't take credit without becoming targets. With Theron gone, the desertion charge against Nicias collapses, and Damon, true to his word, uses his influence to kill the rumors about Ariston's family. Lysandra even cancels the betrothal to Chloe, mostly because Chloe's dad is scrambling to save his own reputation. It's not a Hollywood ending, but it's as close as Athens gets. Ariston and Nicias are free, kind of. Athens is still Athens, with its gossip, its hierarchies, and its endless appetite for drama. They decided to leave the city not for Crete, but for a quiet village in Attica, where the air's cleaner and nobody cares who you love as long as you don't scare the goats. Phaedra throws them a going-away party, because she'll throw a party for anything if there's coin in it. Irene shows up, rolling her eyes but slipping them a pouch of drachmas from Athena's treasury. Even Lysandra sends a grudging note, wishing Ariston luck and reminding him to send her decent clay. As they walk away from Athens, the Acropolis fading into the distance, Ariston and Nicias hold hands, not as a statement, but as two people who've earned a moment of quiet. They've survived a world where love was a gauntlet, where power trumped passion, and where every step forward came with a price. Athens didn't change for them, but they changed Athens just a fraction, by refusing to break. The history books won't remember Ariston and Nicias. They don't write about ordinary men who dared to love in a city that worshipped control, but their story matters, because it's proof that even in history's harshest corners, there were people fighting for something real. Homosexuality in ancient Greece wasn't a label. It was a lived experience, messy and raw, shaped by a society that gave with one hand and stabbed with the other. Ariston and Nicias are gone, but their defiance lingers, like a whisper in the ruins of a city that thought it could outlast everything. Thanks for riding this wild chariot through Greece's underbelly. Drop a comment about what you thought, and let me know if you want more stories from history's forgotten edges. Until next time, keep dodging the spears. Hey guys, imagine waking up one morning to find your crown itching like a poison ivy rash, and realizing that the only thing you truly crave isn't power, but the touch of a forbidden hand. That's right, by the end of this tale, the throne will be but a bitter heirloom gathering dust. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. In the year of the tumbril, technically 1543, but who's counting? The kingdom of Valdoria was less a realm and more a fever dream, stitched together by drunken nobles and the occasional enthusiastic invasion. It was a place where peasant revolts burst out like mildew on old bread, and the royal wardrobe consisted of itchy silks imported at great expense, because nothing says throne-worthy like wearing clothing that breaks out your skin in protest. Our hero, because every absurd historical tragedy requires a hero, or at least someone we can half-heartedly root for, was Prince Alaric, the third-born son of King Leopold IV. As a third son, Alaric's fate should have been to become a minor cleric or a tax collector, but fate, as we'll see, has a flair for irony. Instead, after the untimely demise of his two elder brothers, one trampled by a royal elephant, the other poisoned by what was supposed to be celebratory spiced wine, Alaric found himself catapulted into the line of succession. Suddenly, he was expected to know how to joust, govern, and smile convincingly at court events, 3 skills he lacked in roughly equal measure. On the morning his new title of Crown Prince was announced, Alaric spent an embarrassing half-hour trying to figure out which robe he was supposed to wear. Red for courage, purple for dignity, or gold for, "Hey, look at me, I'm rich." The court. Jester, a man with a monocle so large it doubled as a sundial, offered unsolicited advice. "Wear the green," he crowed. "Green means envy, and everyone will envy you, especially when they see you can't even dress yourself." This tidbit of wisdom was promptly embroidered in silk and sold as souvenirs in the palace gift shop, where they went out of fashion almost immediately. That afternoon, Alaric attended his first council meeting. The royal advisors, 3 of whom could have filled a potion brewing encyclopedia, spoke in riddles and demanded sacrifice enough to make a Slavic pagan blush. They debated grain prices, peasant morale, and whether the neighboring duchy of Frittendorf would invade next Tuesday or wait until Thursday to cause maximum disruption. Alaric nodded gravely, secretly doodling sketches of his own face being pelted by tomatoes. When the meeting adjourned, One advisor slapped him on the back so hard that Alaric nearly spilled his goblet of wine, an accident that, rumor hinted, might have been the true cause of his second brother's demise. At least Alaric had one reprieve from this suffocating absurdity: the annual court ball where the kingdom's most eligible maidens, each equipped with tiny corsets that redistributed vital organs into awkward positions, vied for a waltz and a promise of future patronage. It was there, amid the chandeliers dripping with wax and the fiddlers playing tunes worse than medieval dial-up, that Alaric first saw Lady Celestine. She was standing by a candelabra, her expression so bored you'd think she'd invented ennui. Her gown was a luscious shade of midnight blue, and her hair was piled artfully atop her head, enough hairspray to seal a window pane. When she finally glanced at Alaric, it was with the kind of amused detachment one reserves for particularly pathetic puppies. "What do you think of this dance?" she drawled, as if she'd asked whether he preferred porridge to tapioca. "I think," Alaric stammered, "that neither porridge nor tapioca has ever felt as thrilling as this moment." He immediately regretted it. It sounded exactly like a line from a cheap sonnet. She chuckled, a sound like ivory cracking, and extended a gloved hand. "Come then, Crown Prince, let's see if you can survive 2 minutes of me stepping on your toes." And survive he did. She stepped on his toes twice, and he only tripped once. Victory tasted like sweat and regret, but Alaric felt something else too. A spark of reckless hope, or maybe the early stages of self-inflicted torture. Either way, he was hooked. Their romance blossomed in the worst possible way, in secret letters scented with lavender, an ironic choice given how the nobles despised any scent that wasn't musk or brimstone, in stolen meetings in the moonlit rose gardens. Gardens that, if you ask the Palace Landscaping Committee, were most certainly not used for clandestine assignations involving corsets and promises of elopement. For weeks, Alaric balanced his royal duties with his nightly rendezvous, slipping away from court with the stealth of a drunkard avoiding last call. He practiced birthing proclamations. "Let it be known that all taxes are hereby reduced," while simultaneously drafting love sonnets that would have had Petrarch rolling over in his grave. The juxtaposition of his future as king, endless ceremonies, tax debates, and tax collectors, against the fleeting joy of holding Celestine's hand created a dissonance in his soul that sounded suspiciously like panic. Then came the day he realized there was no future for them within the gilded cage of Valdoria. The court would never tolerate a queen who mocked etiquette, refused to wear stays, and insisted on swapping sardines for caviar at state banquets. And Alaric, tired of pretending the palace was anything but a maze of hypocrisy and mildew, decided to embrace the ultimate act of rebellion, renunciation. He would give up the throne for love, preposterous, tragic, and utterly romantic. Of course, nothing is ever simple in a kingdom built on backstabbing intrigue and plumbing that leaks blood-red water during the winter months. Official pathways to abdication involve no fewer than 14 signatures, a blood oath, and a ceremonial consumption of goat's milk spiced with jalapeno to symbolize the burning away of royal ambition. The royal clerk of succession insisted on a notarized seal, witnessed by 3 dwarves from the eastern mountains who were paid in ale and boat shoes. Meanwhile, Lady Celestine's family, an assemblage of aristocrats convinced that the word love was a euphemism for financial insolvency, demanded proof that Alaric's surrender wouldn't leave her penniless. They sniffed at his coin purse, poked suspiciously at his titles, and offered her more advantageous matches among the European miscellaneous scandals of 1544. Desperate, Alaric plotted an escape. He recruited his trusty page, a wiry boy named Geoffrey, to smuggle messages and supplies, a map drawn on goatskin, a vial of sleeping draught, and a small knife with a mother-of-pearl handle. Geoffrey's fee, half a loaf of stale bread, and the promise that he could keep the rat, Archibald, currently inhabiting the dungeons. Islanded Geoffrey claimed the rat had personality. Under a moon thin as a gossip's patience, Alaric and Celestine met at the edge of the royal orchard. He wore a borrowed cloak that shimmered like a cheese rind under torchlight. She carried only a small bundle of clothes in her trademark sardine tin, because you never know when you might need a snack. They embraced with the passion of tax collectors discovering a loophole. Intense, slightly scandalous, and bound to cause trouble. But as they crept toward the city gate, a sentinel, A man who had fallen asleep on the job and been woken by the sound of rustling hedges spotted them. He shouted in alarm so loud that the palace dogs began howling in solidarity. Torches flared, nobles grabbed halberds, and the king's personal falcon, a bird trained to snatch runaway lovers, was released from its perch. What followed was a sequence of events so ridiculous that bards would later sing about it in taverns, their audiences spitting ale in disbelief. Alaric wrestled the falcon's jesses, leg straps. Celestine hurled her sardine tin like a makeshift bomb. Geoffrey tripped over Archibald the rat, who scuttled off toward freedom, and the sentinel broke his halberd trying to poke Alaric's borrowed cloak, only to discover it was a borrowed cloak and thus snapped under the pressure. Amid this chaos, Alaric realized that neither abdication paperwork nor clandestine flights could free him from this nightmare of his own making. His heart surged with both terror and exhilaration. He was running for love, but surrounded by screaming guards, fury, and an injured falcon screeching overhead like a particularly judgmental god. And then, just as the gates groaned shut behind them, he felt Celestine press a kiss to his cheek. It was salty from those many sardines, but in that moment, it tasted like freedom, or at least like a very questionable adventure. He didn't know what came next. They might head east, toward lands unknown and likely infested with worse aristocrats, or perhaps south, to a coast where they could find passage on a rickety ship captained by someone calling themselves Blackbeard, but who was probably more of a midshipman than an intimidating pirate. All he knew was that, whatever absurd cruelties awaited in the wide world beyond the palace walls, they would face them together, sans crown, sans throne, and with plenty of sardines for sustenance. And so, dear listener, we leave Prince Alaric and Lady Celestine standing on the threshold of destiny, two foolish hearts defying fate, clasping hands in the dark, ready to rewrite history, or at least to scribble a footnote so scandalous that future generations would blush and ask, did that really happen? Spoiler alert, oh it did, and it was glorious. This is only the beginning. The forest ahead is filled with curses, brigands, and very loud owls. But fear not, we'll continue this absurd journey in the next chapter, where negotiations with pirate crews, runaway revolutions, and the occasional plague await. So hang tight and remember, in the Game of Thrones, sometimes the best move is to walk away. They plunged into the forest at a run, boots sloshing through damp undergrowth that tugged at their ankles like unseen admirers. Above them, the trees arched in a cathedral of leaves, each branch murmuring secrets of a world that had no use for kings or queens, only for hungry wolves and even hungrier mugs of mead. Alaric's borrowed cloak snagged on thorns, and he cursed himself for trusting a tailor who had promised thorns be damned as a selling point. Celestine, her sardine tin now jammed shut by moss, stalked ahead with the solemnity of someone determined not to trip over her own feet, though she nearly did, banking sharply to avoid a root that lunged at her like a skeletal hand. Night pressed in around them. The moon, pale and uninterested, offered scant guidance. Alaric muffled a yelp as a branch whipped his cheek. "This forest hates royalty," he observed, voice a whisper. Celestine snorted. "It's not royalty it hates so much as people who can't walk 3 paces without a ceremonial entourage." Her smile, brief and wry, lit his heart, if only because it reminded him that sardines, for all their virtues, did nothing for navigation. They paused beside a gnarled oak, the sort of ancient sentinel that had witnessed too many tragedies and was likely bored of them all. Celestine knelt and traced a rune carved into its bark, a looping symbol of protection, or perhaps just the drunken doodle of a bard. "He died here," she said flatly. "Lord Roderick, who tried to carve his initials to impress his mistress, got lost on the way back and froze to death." She tapped the rune. "May his wife sue the estate." Alaric forced a laugh and peered into the dark. "Any idea which way leads to Fishtide Bay?" Celestine shrugged. "Follow the river," she said, "unless you enjoy being eaten by bears, in which case, head northwest." He bit back a retort. Northwest could lead to nothing but cliffside tumble, but pressed on, trusting her judgment more than his own. The river came upon them with a rush, cold, swift, and complaining about trespassers. Celestine grinned and hopped onto a fallen log that bridged the banks. Alaric followed, wobbling dangerously. Midway, the log shifted and he found himself flailing like a puppet whose strings had been snipped. Celestine reached out, caught his sleeve, and hauled him upright. He landed with a splash, water up to his waist, and yelled curses that echoed downstream. When he emerged, sopping and sheepish, she was nowhere to be seen, until he rounded a bend and spotted her lounging on a mossy rock, feet dipped in the current, as if she'd spent her life bathing in rivers. "I could have let you drown," she said cheerfully, eyes dancing, "but your whining was too entertaining." Alaric pulled himself free and shook like a wet hound. "My dignity might still be salvageable," he muttered, "if you'd care to stop treating me like some peasant in need of instruction." Celestine rose, brushing moss from her skirts. "I treat you exactly like you deserve, Your Highness." Unfiltered, awkward, and constantly on the brink of disaster. They pressed on, the forest thinning as dawn threatened. Birds began their morning cacophony, each trill and call an audition for the world's worst choir. Hunger gnawed at Alaric's belly. Even sardines lost their appeal after midnight. Celestine produced a handful of stale breadcrumbs and offered them with the solemnity of a priest delivering communion. "Eat," she commanded. "The wild boars might appreciate the entertainment of you crawling on your knees next." By mid-morning, they emerged onto a windswept plain dotted with boulders the size of small cottages. The sky was a canvas of pale gray, no comfort, no hint of sun, only the promise of wind that could strip feathers from birds in a single gust. Celestine pointed toward a distant ridge. "Fishtide Bay lies just beyond those hills. If we hurry, we might catch the tide for the night ferry." She patted Alaric's arm, "assuming we don't get eaten first." He managed a wry smile. "I'd prefer to drown in salt water rather than meet my end via boar tusk or falcon's claw." Celestine laughed, a sound as bright as a bell, until a hawk shrieked overhead in protest. They skirted the boulders, shadows shifting as if eager to join the chase. Alaric's thoughts twisted. Freedom tasted like dust and fear, but it tasted better than any crown had ever tasted of sweat and doom. By afternoon, the hills rose like the walls of a forgotten fortress. They climbed, limbs aching, lungs burning. Celestine led with surprising agility. Her skirts hitched high, revealing sturdy leggings and a dagger strapped to her thigh. Alaric, in his ceremonial tunic long since reduced to tatters, felt like a knight in name only. Each step was an exercise in humility. He wondered if his ancestors, those pompous bulls who built this realm on the backs of serfs, ever foresaw a prince fleeing through their stone and field like a common thief. At the crest, they paused. Below them lay Fishtide Bay, a horseshoe of gray-green water dotted with small boats that looked like toys abandoned by giants. A wooden pier jutted into the sea, half submerged by the incoming tide. On the deck, lanterns winked in readiness, and a half-mad ferryman brandished his pole, beckoning. Celestine's eyes glinted. "There," she whispered, "our ticket to anywhere but here." Alaric surveyed the scene. He thought of robes, of ceremonies, of peasants doomed to till the land he had abandoned. A pang of guilt lanced through him, but Celestine squeezed his hand, and he inhaled deep sea air, not of politics, but of salt and survival. They scrambled down the ridge, boots slipping on loose stones. Halfway, a shout broke the wind's howl. "There they are!" Alaric's blood froze. From the south, horsemen charged over the plain, lances glinting like spears of sunlight. Noble pursuers, sent by a furious king, or perhaps more accurately, by his mother's temper. She who had always preferred her sons in matching outfits and obedient. "Run!" Celestine cried. They tore across the slope, spurring muscles that should have quit hours ago. The ferryman saw them and waved frantically. The tide was rising. The pier would soon vanish beneath the waves. Behind them, the clatter of hooves grew louder, a thunder of authority that promised lobotomies by interrogation if they caught him. Alaric burst onto the pier, chest heaving. The planks groaned under his weight. The ferryman shoved the boat to one side. Celestine jumped aboard just as the water reached the deck. Alaric hesitated a fraction too long, calculating possibilities as if he were still seated at a council table, until a lance shattered the pier behind his feet. Splinters flew. The ferryman thrust a hand forward. Alaric grabbed it and was yanked aboard, falling in a tangle of limbs and spilled pride. "Row! Row like your life depends on it," Celestine bellowed. The ferryman, a man whose beard might have served as camouflage for rats, dipped his oar into the surging current. The boat lurched toward open water. Behind them, the horsemen reached the broken pier's edge, swords held high in frustration. One young rider, face contorted with the thrill of dishonor, thundered his horse toward the bay, water splashing around its hooves. The ferryman cursed and rowed faster, each stroke a pact with desperation. Oars dipped and rose, cutting through the salt like knives through cloth. Alaric soaked in the moment, the world he had renounced reduced to distant shapes, banners snapping, horses stamping, nobles shouting for vengeance, but also the promise of new horizons, however bleak and absurd. When they cleared the breakers, Celestine collapsed against the boat's hull, eyes closed. Alaric sank beside her, both of them too exhausted to speak. The ferryman glanced back once, enough to see the horseman's blade glint in the dying light, then set his jaw and kept rowing. Stars began to appear, timid at first, then bolder as dusk deepened. The sea stretched endless before them, a vast canvas awaiting their story. They reached a small isle where driftwood lay scattered like the bones of giant fish. The ferryman beached the boat and hopped ashore, then offered a sack. "Provisions? Not much," he said. "Biscuits, cheese, and a flask of something fermented enough to kill small vermin." He tapped the flask. "You two look like you could use it." Celestine managed a weary grin. "You're a saint, once removed from society." The ferryman curtly inclined his head and vanished into the night, boots muffled against the sand. Alaric and Celestine unpacked their meal in silence, each bite a small triumph. Bread crumbled between their fingers, cheese slid across tanned palms. They drank, cautious at first, then with abandon as warmth unfurled through their limbs. When the flask was empty, Celestine stared at the sky. "This is our world now," she murmured. "No palace, no court, just the open sea and who knows what monsters." Alaric took her hand. "Better monsters than moth-eaten advisors." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Promise me something. Anything. That if we find worse, plague pits, giant crabs, sea serpents, we'll face them together." He kissed her forehead, with sardines in hand. She laughed, a sound as fragile and vital as glass. With sardines in hand, they settled against a driftwood log and drifted into uneasy sleep. Dreams woven of waves, whispers, and half-seen shapes beneath the surface. The moon watched over them, unconcerned, as the tide lapped. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl hooted in mockery, an ancient commentator amused by the folly of mortals. Morning found them stiff but alive. The isle was empty save for gulls that eyed them like profiteers surveying fresh cargo. Celestine stretched and offered Alaric a piece of cheese, which he accepted with a ceremonious nod, as if he had just abdicated the throne of indigestion. "Today," she declared, "we head west to trade this sack of dreams for a passage on a ship bound for lands that prefer plagues in subtext rather than in headlines." Alaric rose, shaking sand from his hair. "Then west it is," he said, and felt no regret. Behind him lay Valdoria, a realm of velvet cages and poisoned chalices. Ahead lay the unknown, risk, ruin, salvation, or at least a chance to survive without a coronation. He glanced at Celestine, wind playing her hair like a harp. She was his compass now, always pointing toward madness, love, and sardines. Together, they dragged the boat back to water's edge and set off into the mist, leaving footprints that waves would soon erase. The world was theirs, not to rule, but to endure. And endure they would with ironic glee, historical absurdity, and the stubborn hope that even in the darkest night, a spark of love could guide two foolhardy souls through the nightmares of the past and into the uncertain dawn. The morning mist clung to their shoulders like a damp cape as Alaric and Celestine pushed the small boat into the graying sea. Their muscles ached from yesterday's flight, but adrenaline lent strength to limbs that should have given out hours ago. Each stroke of the oar was a declaration. "We will not turn back." Behind them, Valdoria's pale coastline faded into memory. Ahead, uncertain horizons beckoned. By midday, the tiny craft was little more than a speck on a heaving green expanse. The wind, fickle as a noble's promise, shifted direction and forced them to tack in zigzag patterns. Celestine's dagger remained strapped to her thigh, more for comfort than necessity. If a corset could bring solace, so would a hidden blade. Alaric, clad in tatters of royal finery, sat in the stern, trying not to look like a drowned rat every time a wave lapped the gunwale. His once proud boots, now waterlogged, squelched mournfully with each movement. As afternoon wore on, hunger gnawed sharper than any boar tusk. They rationed the last of the ferryman's biscuits and cheese. Each morsel savored like a decadent feast. The sea, vast and unending, offered no fish. Nets would have been as useful as court etiquette in a bear pit. Celestine produced her sardine tin one last time, empty. She tapped it, then glared at Alaric. "Your Highness, any royal decree about summoning food?" Alaric met her gaze with a crooked grin. "By my sovereign command, let us pray for edible seaweed." She scoffed. "I'd rather dine on seaweed than sit for another coronation portrait." Even as they joked, the sky darkened. Clouds rolled in low, heavy with rain or malice, possibly both. Alaric felt dread coil in his stomach. A storm at sea was no less brutal than a court intrigue, but far less orchestrated. Lightning forked on the horizon, illuminating waves that grew teeth. Celestine's eyes flashed. "We have two choices. Turn back toward Valdoria and face my mother's wrath, or press on and risk drowning. Pick your poison." Alaric shrugged. "Neither sounds appealing, but I choose drowning over palace dishes laced with arsenic." They braced as the wind howled. The boat shuddered, water spilled over the sides. Celestine leapt to her feet, grasping the mast for balance. Alaric fought the oars, each stroke a battle against the surging tide. A wave crashed, drenching them in salt and fear. Alaric sputtered, tasted seawater and regret. He blinked, and in that instant, Celestine slipped on the slick deck. He lunged, but too late. She disappeared beneath the crest of a wave. "Celestine!" he screamed, dropping the oars to dive after her. The sea grabbed him, tossed him like laundry in a cauldron. Darkness swallowed him whole. For a moment, he felt weightless, as if even his identity had been washed away. Then he surfaced with a gasp, Celestine's hand, pale and tight around a rope tossed by the ferryman, improbably back, as if fate itself intervened with bad timing and worse humor. They were hauled to safety, coughing and shivering, onto the battered deck of a larger vessel. Above them stood a figure draped in oilskin, eyes sunken from too many storms. The ferryman, same beard, same haunted gaze, shook his head. "Thought you'd like a reminder that the sea spares no fools." Celestine spat salt water. "We almost died. Is that your idea of hospitality?" He cracked a grin. "Welcome aboard the raging Borborygmus." Alaric glanced at the name carved on the hull and did not ask where it came from. Inside the cramped hold, they joined half a dozen equally bedraggled souls. Fishers, runaways, and one woman who looked like she'd fought a kraken and won, but kept the scars. The boat pitched and rolled. Rats scurried above, conducting a symphony of squeaks. The woman, scarred, fierce, introduced herself as Marisol. She offered them a chunk of stale herring. Celestine eyed it warily. "We survived a forest, galloping horsemen, and a storm. I suppose a bit of herring is tame by comparison." Marisol laughed, baring teeth that looked like filed daggers. "You'll find the sea's horrors come in surprises." Night fell like a velvet trap. The storm raged unabated, wind whined through the rigging. Alaric lay on the deck, drenched and cold, watching lightning sketch grotesque masks on black waves. He thought of crowns and courtiers, a distant nightmare compared to this living hell. Celestine slung an arm around him. "At least we're together," she whispered. He kissed her forehead, salt and love mingling. "Together in misery," he corrected. She chuckled, as all true romances are. When dawn neared, the storm finally relented, spent and spiteful. The raging Borborygmus floated among calmer swells, a survivor of its own voyage. The crew began repairs, patching sails, bailing water, muttering curses that would make a monk blush. Marisol approached Alaric and Celestine. "You two look nobler than most here," she remarked. "Or maybe just more confused." Alaric straightened as best he could. "We seek passage to lands unknown, to trade a stolen throne for honest living." Marisol considered. "There's a port on the Isle of Corvosa, lawless enough for lovers and rogues alike. You'll pay in coin or service." Celestine tapped her dagger. "Service is our currency." Marisol smirked. "Then welcome to your fate." Over the next days, the raging Borborygmus limped toward Corvosa. The crew shared tales more absurd than Alaric's: a captain who kept a pet monkey as first mate, a cook who seasoned every stew with ground-up barnacles, sailors who swore a ghost ship followed them, seeking vengeance for a lost love. Alaric listened, enthralled. If the world outside courts was madness, at least it was honest madness. One evening, as the sun bled into the sea, Alaric and Celestine sat on the deck's edge, feet dangling over the abyss. He felt the weight of his past, titles, expectations, blood debts, slip from his shoulders with every rocking sway. She traced patterns in the wood, her fingers pale against weathered grain. "What do you miss most?" she asked. He hesitated. "My library, books that spoke of power and prophecy, silly things that promised immortality." She laughed softly. "Now you have real life, ugly, unpredictable, but ours." He nodded. "I'd trade any prophecy for this moment." Night deepened and the stars blinked awake. Celestine pointed to Orion. "In Valdoria, they believed the gods watched through constellations." Alaric shrugged. "I think they're just pinholes in a curtain." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Curtains can be pulled back." He kissed her temple. "Then let's pull it wide." At last Corvosa emerged, a huddle of buildings on a rocky shore, lit by lanterns that defied the encroaching dark. Ships crowded the harbor like a metal forest. The air smelled of brine, sweat, and opportunity. As they disembarked, guards eyeing them with suspicion, Marisol receded into the crowd, leaving them with a single instruction: "Find me at the Salty Serpent Tavern. I'll supply work, for a price." Inside the Salty Serpent, they encountered a den of gamblers, mercenaries, and prospectors. Dice clattered, mugs clanged, and laughter echoed off stone walls slick with oil. A bard sang a drunken ballad, ode to the foolish prince who sold his crown for love and got seaweed. Alaric winced. Celestine chuckled. They followed Marisol to a back room, where a map of distant continents lay sprawled on a table. Marisol unrolled parchment depicting kingdoms unknown, jungles teeming with venomous wildlife, and cities built on the bones of criminals. "You two want a fresh start," she explained, tapping the map. "Here's Opalspire, a city of glass towers and mad scholars, or Durgan's Reach, fortress of exiles and outlaws, or, if you crave real obscurity, the Isles of Riot, where laws melt like wax." Celestine leaned in. "Which pays the best?" Marisol grinned. "Depends. Do you prefer coin, secrecy, or the chance to die spectacularly?" Celestine glanced at Alaric. "I vote spectacularly." He rolled his eyes. "I vote coin." They settled on Opalspire, a place rumored to trade secrets rather than goods, where a memory could be bought and sold. To reach it, they'd sail south across the Shadow Gulf, notorious for whirlpools and sea creatures that enjoyed eating deckhands by moonlight. The pay, 50 gold crowns each, enough to begin anew, but only if they survived the voyage. That night, they slept in a rented room above the tavern. The mattress was a sack of feathers and regret. Bed bugs held midnight council under the sheets. Still, as Celestine drifted into uneasy dreams, she murmured, "At least it's not a throne." Alaric kissed her hair. "Here's to thrones, rats, storms, and love." She smiled in her sleep. "And sardines." He laughed quietly. "Especially sardines." Dawn brought them to the docks, where a sleek merchant vessel, the Nightingale's Mask, waited. Its captain, a statuesque woman with ice-blue eyes, demanded their names, histories, and loyalties. Alaric introduced himself as Alaric of no kingdom, and Celestine as Celestine of no dowry. The captain nodded. "Good, you're expendable." Celestine inclined her head. We're used to that. With a curt order, the gangway was pulled up. They were prisoners of contract. As the Nightingale's mask slipped its moorings, Alaric watched Corvos's silhouette recede. No longer Prince, not yet something else. He felt the weight of uncharted identity settle upon him. Celestine took his hand, and together, they faced the open sea once more, where storms, monsters, and marvels awaited like old friends with grudges. But this time, they would meet them armed with love, sardines long gone, and the delicious absurdity of two fools who chose each other over crowns. And so begins the third chapter of a journey not toward a throne, but toward whatever lay beyond fear and wallpaper made of royal lineage. It is a path paved with salt and starlight, where every wave might drown you and every dawn might save you. Yet, in that unwritten promise, Alaric and Celestine found something more enduring than any crown. The knowledge that, in the theater of history, the greatest rebellion is to simply live. The Nightingale's mask cut through the shadow gulf like a blade through silk, its dark hull swallowing waves and spitting foam in defiance of the stormless sky. Alaric stood at the rail, toes gripping slippery wood, feeling neither the chill of sea spray nor the pang of homesickness. Homesickness required a home. His was a memory of tapestries and betrayals. Celestine hovered at his side, arms crossed, wind whipping her hair into a frenzied halo. She looked every inch the pirate's nightmare, blood in her eyes, determination on her lips. Below deck, the crew moved like ants in a colony built on desperation and bad rum. Marisol had vanished the moment they signed contracts, leaving them to the mercy of a captain whose smile was sharper than a carrack's prow. Alaric and Celestine were assigned bunks in the forecastle, a cramped den with bunting that smelled of sweat and mildew. Their belongings, a single satchel containing tattered clothes, a dagger too small to defend a child, and a map whose ink was already smudging under the waves' contempt. Their first night at sea passed in uneasy dreams. Alaric dreamt of his father's fist pounding a table, coronation robes aflame, Celestine's sardine tin rolling into the abyss. Celestine dreamt of corsets tightening, each breath a death sentence, and Alaric's crown tumbling into a yawning chasm. They awoke to the ship's pitch and groan, the call of gulls overhead and the muffled curses of sailors bailing water from the bilge. By dawn, a mist clung to the horizon. The captain, Captain Morwenna Dragon, whose name sounded like an omen, summoned them to the quarterdeck. She was a statuesque woman with skin pale as bone and hair that shimmered like oil. In her hand, a spyglass longer than Celestine's sword. She peered through it, then at them. "You two," she rasped, voice like broken glass, "are to assist in the cargo hold. There's a crate marked with the sigil of Opalspire's Guild of Memory Brokers. Guard it with your lives, or at least don't lose it. Speak to no one about its contents." She handed each a wax-sealed letter folded to fit a fist. "Deliver that to Master Viridian in Opalspire. Understood?" Alaric swallowed. "Yes, Captain." He looped the letter around his finger like a noose. Celestine inclined her head once, sharply, and followed orders as though they were invitations to a masquerade ball. In the hold, they found crates piled high, barrels of salted fish, chests of trade goods, and beneath them, the marked box, no larger than a coffin for a child. Its wood was burnished black, the edges banded in iron. Celestine traced the emblem, an eye within a labyrinth. "Memory brokers," she murmured. "They trade recollections like spices." Alaric's stomach clenched. What memories would anyone sell? The taste of mother's milk? The echo of a battlefield? She shrugged. Or the memory of who you were, so you can become someone else. They wedged the crate between barrels and stood guard. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the creak of timbers and the slap of waves. Alaric found himself captivated by the crate's promise, a Pandora's box of lost selves. Celestine paced, dagger sheathed but ready, scanning the shadows as though expecting specters to emerge. On the third night, the fog rolled in thick as wool, swallowing lanterns and drowning the world in gray. A hush fell over the ship, an ennui that blanketed even the rats. Suddenly, a thump echoed from below. Celestine's hand snapped to her dagger. "They're here." Alaric crouched beside her. The hatch to the cargo hold rattled. A voice, low and muffled, hissed in a tongue neither recognized. Celestine slid the crate out from its hiding place. Whatever they want, they'll have to pry this from frozen fingers. Alaric nodded, heart pounding. The hatch creaked open. Two shapes descended, cloaked figures, faces hidden by cowls stitched with silver thread. They moved like shadows come to life. One of them spoke. Hand over the box of memories, and no one need leave this ship with empty heads. His voice was velvet, smooth, dangerous. Celestine stepped forward, raising an eyebrow. Try taking it, and you'll find yourself drowned in regret. The second figure laughed, a sound that dripped malice. Regret is a commodity we trade. Steel rang against iron as daggers flicked from sheaths. Alaric caught one hilt by pure instinct and yanked it free. Celestine blocked a second strike with her forearm. In the cramped hold, the clash of steel echoed like thunder. The crate tumbled, wood slivering under blows. Alaric lunged, grazing the attacker's arm, and the cowl fell back. A woman's face, pale with ambition, eyes gleaming like cut jewels. The other plunged dagger into Celestine's palm. She hissed but disarmed him in a single motion and kicked him back. Alaric rolled, seized the crate, and thrust it at the pale woman. "Take it," he shouted. "If you want memories, have them." She smirked, eyes alight, and in an instant vanished, swallowed by a hidden trap door in the hold's floor. The other figure bolted past them, up the ladder into the fog. Silence. The ship groaned overhead. Celestine dropped to her knees, pressing a hand to her wound. Nothing a bandage and 6 more sardine tins couldn't fix, she muttered, though her eyes sparkled with triumphant fury. Alaric set the crate back in place, heart pounding like a war drum. "We can't trust anyone," he whispered. "Not even the captain." Celestine nodded, breathing shallow. "We deliver this ourselves, or destroy it." They waited until the dawn found them battered but alive. On deck, the fog had lifted, revealing a sky bruised with dawn's first light. Captain Dragon stormed toward them, hair disheveled, boots splattered with bilge water. "What in the 7 hells happened below?" she demanded. Alaric met her gaze. "Assault. They tried to steal the crate." The captain's eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" Celestine stepped forward, hands still trembling. "Guarded it, defended it, and lived to tell you." Dragon's lips curled into a slow smile. "Good, because Opalspire pays well for intact memories." With that, the captain strode off, leaving them trembling in her wake. Alaric slipped the wax-sealed letter back into his pocket. The words inside would grant safe passage through Opalspire's labyrinthine bureaucracy if they delivered it themselves, but the crate remained a puzzle. What did it contain? Who would go to such lengths to steal memories? 2 days later, the Nightingale's mast glided into the port of Opalspire, a city draped in glass towers whose windows reflected the sun like prismatic wounds. Streets wound through spires connected by sky bridges adorned with glowing runes. Alaric and Celestine disembarked under the watchful eyes of stone gargoyles perched on every ledge, their mouths open in eternal judgment. They found Master Viridian's workshop in a narrow alley off the Market of Forgotten Wishes. A sign of polished obsidian, an eye enclosed in a maze, hung above a yawning doorway. Inside, shelves crammed with vials, scrolls, and metallic cages containing whisper-thin threads of light, memories in physical form. A chandelier of suspended teacups rattled overhead as Viridian emerged from shadows. He was a man whose age no longer mattered, his face creased by secrets and sleepless nights. "Ah," he sighed, voice like parchment unfolding. "The crownless courier arrives." He accepted the crate with reverence, brushing his fingertips across the iron bands. "You have done well." He sliced the wax seal on Alaric's letter and read it by torchlight. "Approved." He beckoned them deeper. "Come, step into the sanctum." They followed him through corridors lined with hourglasses counting down lost minutes, into a chamber where a single table stood beneath a dome of stained glass depicting a drowning man grasping at stars. Viridian placed the crate on the table and, with 4 swift motions, 2 cuts with a slender knife, a twist of a dial, and the insertion of a crystal phial, it opened. Inside lay a crystalline orb, no larger than a fist, resting on a cushion of velvet black as sin. "This," Viridian whispered, "is the memory of a god." Alaric's heart stuttered. "A god?" Viridian nodded. Not the deity you might imagine, but the memory of one, that which inspired worship, war, and wonders. Hold it, and you will glimpse the mind of a being beyond mortal reckoning. Celestine's hand hovered over the orb as if it were a lit flame. Why does anyone need such a thing? Viridian's eyes glittered. Because memory is power. To understand divine thought is to reshape the world. Alaric felt a tremor of fear. To wield such a memory was to court madness. He glanced at Celestine. Her eyes shone with a hunger he'd never seen. She reached forward, fingertips brushing the orb's surface. A pulse of light surged through her and she gasped, eyes rolling back, lips parting as if tasting eternity. Alaric lunged, grabbing her arm. Celestine! She collapsed against him, chest heaving. Viridian hurried forward with a flask of clear liquid. The antidote, he murmured, pouring it between her lips. She drank and color returned to her face. She glared at Viridian. You tricked me. He inclined his head. You wanted knowledge. Now choose. You may keep the memory at a price, or let it return to this crate and walk away, changed but alive. Celestine stared at the orb, then met Alaric's gaze. He felt the weight of choice settle on his shoulders, power or love, madness or safety. He squeezed her hand. We've survived storms, assassins, and drowned dreams. We're not gods. Celestine's eyes softened. She exhaled and stepped back. Viridian's shoulders sagged as if relieved. He lifted the orb with care and returned it to the crate, sealing the lid with ritual precision. Fools, he murmured. Perhaps the greatest power is knowing one's limits. He handed them a pouch of gold crowns, payment in full, and 2 clay tablets inscribed with safe conduct through the city, and a letter of credit at Opal Spire's leading inn. They left the sanctum, hearts pounding. Outside, the city pulsed with veiled danger, alchemists debating philosophers, merchants trading memories for fortunes, beggars offering to sell their own childhoods for a crust of bread. Alaric and Celestine navigated the crowds, clutching their tablets. Celestine turned to him, eyes bright with relief. No gods, no divine madness, just us. Alaric kissed her forehead. Just us, 2 fools who chose love over omnipotence. They checked into the Gilded Lily Inn, a lofty tower of white stone where rooms cost more than a peasant's lifetime wages. The innkeeper, an obsequious man with a surprisingly optimistic mustache, led them to a chamber with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. They collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally claiming them. Through the glass, they saw Opal Spire in all its glory, an endless mosaic of glass and steel, of ambition and memory laid bare. Below, the market of forgotten wishes glowed like a nebula of hopes and regrets. Alaric reached for Celestine's hand. We've come far, he whispered. She leaned into him. And yet, the journey feels just beginning. He nodded, staring at the distant labyrinth of streets. Tomorrow, we find work, build a life here, or die trying. She smiled, a fierce promise shining in her eyes. With sardines in hand, she joked softly. He laughed, a sound unguarded and bright. Always sardines. As they drifted toward sleep, the city hummed around them, an organism of memories, desires, and whispered bargains. In Opalspur, one could buy the past, sell the present, or steal the future. But for Alaric and Celestine, the greatest treasure was simpler. The knowledge that, come what may, they faced it together, unbroken by crowns or curses. And in a world where memory was currency, their own would remain theirs alone, a testament to love's absurd, indomitable power. Hey guys, have you ever wondered what happens when absolute power collides with absolute loneliness, and the resulting explosion is tempered only by a wooden bathtub and a chorus of court eunuchs? Well, buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into the strangest bedtime rituals, the most awkward cuddle sessions, and the downright bizarre intimacy habits of those larger-than-life rulers we call the Russian Tsars. Imagine this, you're a Romanov, and loneliness is your closest confidant. Your days are filled with interminable ceremonies. You bow here, you smile there, you pretend that the peasants adore your every decree, while your nights are a confusing blur of fur-lined chambers and overly enthusiastic chambermaids. It's a world where you must guard not only your crown, but also your unmentionables, lest some scheming courtier steal more than just your slipper. Let's start with Ivan IV, aka Ivan the Terrible. Now, you might think terrible refers solely to his penchant for impaling enemies on spikes, but his love life was equally gruesome. Legend says that Ivan insisted on wedding gifts so bizarre that his poor fiancées were left scratching their heads in bewilderment. One bride was gifted a live bear in her boudoir, presumably to keep her warm, and a second was given a pair of iron chastity belts for her own protection. Talk about setting the mood. When Ivan wanted intimacy, he'd summon his bride to the great hall at midnight, where they'd share a single candlelit kiss before he retreated to his private torture chamber, dressing room. For Ivan, affection was as fleeting and terrifying as one of his fits of rage. Fast forward a century or two, and you meet Peter the Great, the Tsar who modernized Russia by terrorizing his nobles into cutting off their magnificent beards. But behind his stern reforms lay a man with peculiar personal practices. Peter believed that to forge a nation, he had to first forge his body, and by extension, his libido. He invited foreign sailors to teach him the art of carousing at sea, turning his royal yacht into a floating brothel of sorts. Whispered court gossip suggests his favorite pastime was sneaking into the hammocks of his naval officers at night, testing their loyalty and their stamina. In Peter's world, seduction was a form of statecraft, and wooden leg or no, he expected conquest on every front. Then, there's Catherine the Great's consort, the hapless Peter III, whose idea of intimacy was to recite poetry, while his wife fended off bored courtiers with a fur muff. When Catherine discovered that Peter preferred to dress up as a Prussian hussar and march around their bedroom shouting war cries, she decided a different approach was in order. She turned to discreet lovers, artists, guardsmen, and poets whose only requirement was the ability to read between the lines of her letters. She commissioned coded missives written in invisible ink. A stroke here meant come closer. A dot there signaled wear more velvet. Their clandestine trysts took place in the palace greenhouse, amid orchids that wilted under the intensity of their secret rendezvous. Flowers, after all, make excellent accomplices in scandal. Nicholas I, that stern sentinel of autocracy, took a more hygienic approach. He decreed that all imperial mattresses be stuffed with birch bark, a natural insect repellent, but also a romantic aphrodisiac if you enjoy listening to your lover sneeze. Even his children's nursery sounded like a medieval lumber mill. When Nicholas attempted to offer affection to his wife, Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna, he found that bark-filled bedding wasn't exactly conducive to pillow talk. Reports tell of Nicholas retreating to a separate chamber, furnished with feather-stuffed cushions smuggled in from France, where he could practice his caresses without risking splinters. Alexander II, the emancipator of the serfs, believed in liberating hearts as well as peasants. He installed a personal kissing gallery on the palace grounds, an open-air colonnade lined with marble statues of mythological lovers. Courtiers whispered that Alexander strolled there at dusk with his mistress, serenading her beneath Cupid's gaze. But Alexander's grand romantic gestures were overshadowed by his habit of carrying a miniature bell. He'd ring each time he felt an urge he deemed inappropriate. The tinkling sound echoed through the hush of the gallery, ensuring that his paramour never forgot the weight of her impropriety. She, in turn, began wearing earplugs, another oddity added to the imperial roll call. Alexander III, his son, was a man of few words but many quirks. Determined to prove that a real Tsar need never speak to convey love, he developed a system of semaphore flags for private use. In his private museum, an alcove behind a velvet curtain, he'd signal "I adore you" with a diagonal wave, or "leave me alone" with a horizontal swipe. His beloved Empress Maria Feodorovna, ever diplomatic, learned to respond in kind, to flick her fan forward for "kiss me" and tilt it sideways for "fetch the footman." Their court was like a living semaphore board, with stately ladies and gentlemen flitting about like nervous students in a Victorian pantomime. Tsar Nicholas II, the tragic last of the line, sought solace in more conventional intimacy, but found the trappings of royalty sabotaged his every endeavor. Consort Alexandra's mourning for their hemophiliac son spilled into their private chambers. Émile Zola and other Westerners noted that the imperial couple's bedside approached the look of a field hospital more than a boudoir. Nicholas attempted to bring joy by installing a radio set in their bedroom. hoping that music might drown out grief. Instead, static and Morse code broadcasts from the front lines of global conflict filtered through the wallpaper, turning midnight serenades into crackling dirges. Behind every czar was a small army of courtiers, ladies-in-waiting, and eunuchs who served as both chaperones and unwitting voyeurs. Imagine practicing your most intimate moves under the watchful gaze of a eunuch, whose sole job was to ensure your socks were aligned to imperial code. If you so much as yawned too loud, the eunuch would bow and retreat, as though he'd just witnessed a proclamation too scandalous even for the palace walls. But perhaps the strangest intimacy habit of all was the Russian tradition of the palace bidet, or bidet of honor, installed in the Tsar's private suite. It was said that the device, a porcelain basin mounted on gilded legs, was reserved exclusively for the monarch's personal use. No guest could approach the emperor's bidet without risking instant execution, or at least a stern reprimand from the chamberlain. Tsars believed that such exclusivity preserved their divine purity. They ritualistically washed their hands and feet before any act of state, convinced that only by purifying themselves physically could they approach any act of intimate diplomacy, be it kissing treaty scrolls or, more pointedly, their consorts. Through the centuries, these rituals evolved from clumsy power plays to sumptuous intimacies. The Tsars understood that intimacy, like governance, was a performance, and they scripted each encounter with the precision of a military campaign. Whether they wielded a flag semaphore or rang a warning bell, these rulers orchestrated their passions to maintain the mystique of the throne. And yet, for all their bizarre customs, the Russian Tsars were at heart human, vulnerable to loneliness, craving affection, and prone to the same awkward fumblings we mortals endure. Their grandiosity only magnified their need for connection, turning every bedchamber into a stage and every touch into an act of statecraft. So next time you marvel at the onion domes of the Kremlin, remember the hidden layers beneath, histories of strange beds, stranger lovers, and the curious intimacy habits of those who ruled a vast empire. Because in the end, the Tsars' greatest power may have been not their armies or their decrees, but their ability to transform the simplest human need, intimacy, into a spectacle as absurd and unforgettable as history itself. The sun has barely crested the horizon over the frozen Moskva River when our story picks up again, in the dim corridors of the Winter Palace, where velvet hangings swallow sound and every footstep echoes like a conspiracy. Welcome back to the strange intimacy habits of the Russian Tsars, where even a simple embrace demands protocol as elaborate as a treaty signing. By the late 1600s, after Peter the Great had shaved more beards than a barber at closing time, Russia's insatiable appetite for modernity collided with its obsession for ritual. Enter Tsar Fyodor III, Peter's nephew, a man whose delicate constitution made him the realm's most eligible invalid. Fyodor's court devised the pillow inspection ceremony, a nightly ritual ostensibly to ensure his feathers hadn't been replaced by inferior goose down, a scandal that, they claimed, once led to a case of royal pneumonia. But beneath the veneer of hygiene lurked a grim necessity. With Fyodor's immune system weaker than diluted vodka, no commoner was allowed near his bed without first prostrating before his pillows, reciting the prayer of the soft rest, and demonstrating proper pillow fluffing technique. Only then could they approach his chamber and, if fortune favored them, receive a murmured Dobry nochi, good night, accompanied by an almost imperceptible brush of his hand against theirs. Imagine the poor chambermaid trembling in her silken slippers as she knelt on the cold marble floor to recite the sacred fluffing prayer. One wrong word, one botched flourish with the down, even an errant puff of feathers in the wrong direction, and she risked 18 strokes with a birch rod. It was intimacy conducted at the end of a knout, with affection measured in goose quills and threat of corporal punishment. When Fyodor passed away in 1682, his cousin Sophia assumed regency, a savvy woman who knew that to rule Russia behind the scenes, one had to manipulate more than politics. One had to master the art of the suggestive glance. Sophia's personal pastime became the window exchange, a protocol by which she and selected favorites arranged midnight tete-a-tetes through adjacent balconies. Draped in heavy brocaded shawls and perched behind iron grills, they passed encrypted love letters sealed with wax and laced with faint traces of clove oil, to mask the scent of fear, or perhaps feverishly concocted aphrodisiacs. Rumor whispered that Sophia once conducted a 3-hour love debate on whether a more rambunctious nightingale song in springtime heightened passion, though skeptics claimed it was merely a political metaphor for her insatiable ambition. With the ascension of Peter II, the grandson of Peter the Great, court life slipped further into absurdity. Peter II was a teenager with 2 obsessions: toy soldiers and the mysterious confines of his grandmother's bedchamber. Determined to liberate her boudoir secrets, he commandeered his toy dragoons to stage mock sieges on her door, his young counselors cheering as if they'd just captured Kazan. When he finally burst in, sword gleaming, he found only silk cushions and a porcelain bidet encrusted with ormolu. Undeterred, he declared the boudoir a fortress of feminine sorcery and dubbed himself Conqueror of the Pink Chamber. Afterwards, with boyish enthusiasm, he invited the court to witness what he considered the spoils of war: an enormous cache of cosmetics, scented sachets, and a collection of highly scandalous undergarments he believed would make excellent siege trophies. As the 18th century unfolded, Paul III, son of Catherine the Great, seized the reins and twisted them into a terrifying framework of militarized courtship. If Peter the Great had turned his court into a naval brothel, Paul turned his bedchamber into a drill ground. He drafted a personal codex of intimate maneuvers, a laundry list of exercises for couples, foot drills, marching in place side by side, salute practice, a brisk head turn combined with a kiss on the cheek, and synchronized breathing, intended to mimic the rhythmic rowing of his beloved galley fleet. Any slip in timing, say a slower exhale from the consort, incurred penalty sets of push-ups on the marble floor. One can only imagine Empress Maria trying to smile while dropping and rising on her hands, corseted waist trembling, all in the name of imperial fitness. Paul's infamous obsession with chain of command extended to bachelor's nights, secretive gatherings for the young male aristocracy to debate strategies for seeding the Russian stock. These so-called fecundity sessions involved mustache competition. Whosoever sported the most impressive whiskers would receive an audience with the Tsar, obligatory toasts to future heirs, and the reading of love letters from previous generations, each more florid than the last. Paul decreed that any man who failed to pen at least 10 lines of poetic longing for his paramour would be demoted to the ranks of the palace kitchen to assist with cabbage peeling, a fate worse than exile to Siberia in any noble's book. As the 19th century dawned, Alexander the charming, manic-depressive decorator of cathedrals, brought a surprising twist to court intimacy. Haunted by visions of Napoleon and Kafkaesque nightmares in Polish villages, Alexander convened the mirror matrimony, wherein he and his consort, Empress Elizabeth, spent hours before a mirrored shrine, reciting confessions of fear and desire. Draped in cerulean silks, they would face their reflections and alternately confess their anxieties. "I fear I shall never be brave enough," and profess love, "Yet I love you beyond reason," all to the accompaniment of a quartet of serfs plucking, heart-shaped lyres. To outsiders, it resembled a bizarre therapy session mixed with a masquerade ball. But to Alexander, it was a sacred ritual, a way to exorcise his melancholia and bind his marriage through shared vulnerability. His successor, Nicholas I, ever the stickler, found the mirror matrimony dangerously undignified. He replaced the ceremony with the equerry's embrace, a fleeting custom in which Nicholas, in full military regalia, would receive the equerry of the bedchamber each morning at dawn. Rather than an embrace of lovers, it was an embrace of loyalty, a crisp salute followed by a shoulder-to-shoulder clasp. The equerry then reported on the previous night's bedroom decor. Was the tabernacle of scented oils in order? Had the sheets been changed? Were the drapery tassels symmetric? Only when every item on the chamberlain's checklist was greenlit would Nicholas deem the day fit for marital activities, which, needless to say, were scheduled with military precision and logged in the imperial bed journal. But the crown jewel of weirdness arrived with Alexander II's immediate family, the Romanovs of the mid-19th century, whose proclivities veered toward the macabre. Grand Duke Sergei, Alexander II's nephew, believed that the most potent aphrodisiac was fear itself. He staged dungeon date nights in the Tsars' private prison cells, inviting aristocratic debutantes to tea amid the clanking of chains and the moans of condemned prisoners. He claimed the thrill of witness to suffering heightened the senses, whispering, "Erotica is but a heartbeat away from horror." Unsurprisingly, many young noblewomen arrived gowned in black velvet, carrying fans painted with skulls, just in case they needed to fan fainting fits during the evening's grisly entertainments. Meanwhile, Olga, one of Alexander II's daughters, grew up convinced that love letters should be etched in ice and delivered at dawn. She commissioned ornate pens made of crystal, so fragile that just dipping them in ink could result in a shattered quill and an icy puddle of tears. Her suitors braved sub-zero temperatures to inscribe their courtship vows on blocks of ice, where they would melt like ephemeral promises. Olga herself would receive these frozen sonnets, clutch them to her chest until they thawed, and then file away the water in vials, a collection she kept in a frosted cabinet, each labeled with names like March 12th, Petr Ivanovich, and April 23rd, Vladimir of Kiev. Rounding out the century was Nicholas II's own bizarre attempt at intimacy, the wireless whisper. Obsessed with the new marvel of radio, the Tsar rigged his private apartments with a secret transmitter so he and his wife, Alexandra, could exchange messages without the scrutiny of palace censors. They developed code words like birch for "I miss you" or Cossack for "hurry to my side" that crackled through the static at night. Unfortunately, the system suffered from unpredictable interference. One evening, a message intended for Alexandra, "Return at once, catastrophe," was picked up by a Finnish fisherman halfway across the Gulf of Finland, causing widespread panic among Baltic herring stocks and resulting in a midnight mutiny of rowboats. It took 3 days, 2 apologies, and a crate of royal smoked fish to restore calm. Throughout all these centuries, one theme remained constant. The Tsar's bedchamber was less a place of rest than a theater of power, where even the most intimate gestures were choreographed with political intent. Each ritual, each fetish, each absurd device, from birch bark mattresses to ice-engraved love letters, served as a testament to the ruler's need to control the untamable chaos of human desire. And yet, for all their ostentatious quirks, the Tsars were no less human for it. They longed for comfort, for reassurance, and for moments of unguarded warmth, a stolen kiss behind tapestry, or the thrill of a shared secret in a mirrored vestibule. In a world where every glance could spark a coup and every touch could trigger scandal, the Russian Tsars found ways to domesticize their fears, to stage manage their passions, and to transform the most primal acts of intimacy into protocols as elaborate as a state levy. So as you imagine these emperors dozing on birch bark pallets, ringing warning bells at the first flutter of desire, or transmitting flirtations via crackling Morse code, remember that at the heart of every absurd ceremony lay a simple truth. Even the most absolute sovereign cannot legislate away loneliness, and sometimes, the stranger the ritual, the more it mirrors the desperation of a human heart seeking connection in a world ruled by crowns and conspiracies. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll explore the twisted love affairs of the Romanov exile in moonlit Paris salons, aboard doomed ocean liners, and in the shadowed alleys of war-torn Europe, where the conventions of imperial intimacy met the anarchy of revolution. Because the final chapters of this story prove that when your world collapses, the hunger for closeness becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. The moon hung low over Montmartre when Grand Duchess Xenia, once the pride of imperial Russia, now a displaced shadow, slipped into the powder blue salon of Madame Laval, the most notorious hostess in exile's circle. The salon smelled of absinthe, cigarette smoke, and brittle aristocratic desperation. Xenia's gown, sewn from scraps of her former court mantles, rustled like autumn leaves as she moved between gilded chairs and precarious friendships. Across the room lounged her cousin, Princess Tatiana, who had transformed her steely regal posture into the languid elegance of a Parisian diva, complete with fingertip-length gloves and the kind of languid smile that concealed a heart breaking in. Triple meter. As the guests gathered, they spoke in hushed French, of fortune lost, of Bulgakov's dashed romances, and most urgently of intimacy, when every lover was a man untethered by title, but weighed down by survival. One former chamberlain leaned forward to confess his new routine. Each night he'd tie a ribbon torn from a serf's blouse around his wrist, whispering prayers for fidelity as if that scrap of cotton could anchor him against the shuddering tides of exile. Another, a disgraced count, described reconstructing his lover's voice by recording her laughter onto wax cylinders, an absurd technology for an absurd longing. Xenia herself nursed a chipped teetotaler's cup of rosehip tea, her compulsory replacement for vodka, while listening to the chatter. She remembered the Winter Palace's hush before dawn, the hush that allowed her mother's footsteps to vibrate through the corridors as she tiptoed to the Tsar's bedchamber. Now, in a city that had no crown to guard and no throne to ascend, Xenia's nights were invaded by ambition not of state but of flesh. Did her lover truly prefer her, or merely the idea of a fallen princess? In a gesture that would have horrified court etiquette, she stood and strode to the grand mirror behind the pianist, lifting a corner of its velvet drape. In the glass, she found herself twice, the exiled royal and the woman scrubbing laundry in the pay-by-the-hour laundromat. The intimacy she craved, undoing the ribbons of her hair under a lover's gaze, feeling safe enough to confess her fear of unpopularity, had become as distant as the Siberian snows she once crossed in regal carriages. She paused to consider. Could she dare to touch the arm of a simple musician, Monsieur Leclerc, whose hands had once caressed Tchaikovsky's violin, and now trembled at the mere memory of imperial ceremony? Would he see the broken duchess or still bow at her insignia? Meanwhile, aboard the SS Kursk, bound for Odessa and full of refugees who wore their hope like ragged sashes, young Prince Andrei faced another flavor of intimacy's agony. He shared a cabin with half a dozen soldiers and a nervous seamstress named Larissa, hired to mend uniforms shredded by the cold and the revolution. At night, he wrote letters in a shaky hand. "My dearest Larissa, your needle at work is the softest hymn to civilization I've ever heard." He folded the paper with royal precision, pressing a lock of his own hair between the pages as a talisman of their impossible union. Yet with every swing of the ship, the paper curled, the hair stuck, the union frayed. In the communal washroom, a cramped space of rusting taps and chipped enamel, Larissa taught him to bathe without chamberlains. She rinsed his hair with salt water, admonishing him to scrunch his shoulders against the draft. Her fingers brushed against a single medal on his chest, and he saw in her eyes not disdain for his rank, but the fleeting spark of compassion. For one stammering moment, Andrei allowed himself to imagine a future where he could dispense with medals entirely, where Larissa's stitchery replaced statecraft. And then the course corrected, urgency pulling him toward the rail, toward the horizon where Russia's pain beckoned like a wounded beast. Back in Paris, Tatiana discovered the erotic potential of postcards, tiny masterpieces of memory and longing. She commissioned a lithographer to print images of the frozen Neva at dawn, then scrawled beneath each, "If only I could melt beneath your kiss." These were sent to unsuspecting recipients, an impoverished ballet master, a cafe pianist, even a Romanian diplomat whose reply contained only the words, "Madame, your frost pierces my heart." Each postcard became a gamble. Would the man burn it as forbidden propaganda, frame it as tragic art, or dare to pen a return verse? For Tatiana, the thrill of risk outweighed any satisfaction of actual affection. Meanwhile, in Trieste, Grand Duke Michael, once heir presumptive and now captain of a merchant schooner, discovered the absurd intimacy of maritime discipline. His mistress was an Italian cook named Rosalia, whose recipes he guarded like state secrets. Each dawn, she brewed coffee so strong it could strip varnish, and they shared a bench on deck, synchronized in silence as the sea yawned beneath them. Michael, having spent his youth attending state banquets, found more intimacy in Rosalia's spatula than ever in formal dances. He learned to wipe flour from her cheek with trembling reverence, to taste her olive oil olive by olive as though sampling unknown provinces of her soul. In Vienna, ex-Princess Irina pledged herself to psychoanalysis, seeking the Freudian key to unlock her czarist anxieties. On a chaise longue that smelled faintly of dust and ambition, she confessed to Dr. Müller her obsession with mirrors, how she found herself undressing before any reflective surface, hoping that she might glimpse her true self behind the royal facades. Dr. Müller nodded gravely, adjusting his pince-nez, and prescribed an exercise in authentic touch. Weekly gatherings where Irina would host anonymous guests in total darkness, exchanging whispered caresses on props, silk scarves, velvet ropes, wooden uks, boxes designed to obscure identity and thus strip away the self-consciousness of rank. The experiment was deemed not entirely orthodox, but Irina returned month after month, her laughter echoing through the pitch-black chamber like a shock of new air. As summer bled into autumn, the exiled Romanovs found solace in a traveling circus that toured Europe's decaying theaters. Here, beneath the big top's tattered canopy, acrobats twisted in impossible knots, and fire-eaters courted flames as if flirting with death. The former Tsarina Maria, disguised in a ringmaster's tailcoat and derby hat, orchestrated a night of feats. A trapeze artist who performed blindfolded, a contortionist who folded herself into a snuff box, and, for the grand finale, a couple who performed a slow, silent pas de deux atop a rolling barrel. In that circus, Maria witnessed the purest intimacy she'd ever known. It unfolded without protocol, without fear of treason, in a world that valued vulnerability as the enemy of entropy. In London, Grand Duke Vladimir turned to technology for connection. He acquired an early telephone, an object so rare that operators had to piece it together from experimental labs. At night, he dialed a private number that connected him to his daughter, Princess Marina, herself in Middle Europa on diplomatic mission. Their voices crackled across wires coded in static. He taught her how to modulate her tone to convey longing. She instructed him on the art of conversation without the weight of imperial pronouns. Their exchanges were less scandalous than healing. "Tell me about your day," he'd say, and she'd describe a Viennese cafe where she sipped blue Danube liqueur and watched dancers waltz. Their intimacy became electrical, each current a reminder that even exile could be bridged by the soft power of words. By winter, the exiled community turned to religion. In a converted chapel in Belgrade, they held confession by candlelight, where ranks dissolved beneath the flicker of votive lamps. Xenia knelt before the altar, fingers curled around a prayer rope, and confessed not her sins, but her loneliness. "Bless me, Father, for I have lost my bedchamber." The priest, a humble Carpathian monk, offered no absolution, only a silent blessing as she rose. Around her, former officers traced crosses in the air, sisters whispered litanies of hope, and somewhere beyond the stained glass windows, bullets fell in the Balkan winter like rotten fruit. In that moment, intimacy was collective survival, an act of confession that bound them more surely than any royal oath. Finally, as the world lurched from war to war and borders shifted like sand, the Romanov exiles discovered the most radical intimacy of all: anonymity. In pocket-sized passports that bore the legend immigrant status, they shed titles like old coats, stepping into cafes and concert halls as simple men and women. Xenia, now Madame Petrov, danced the tango in a smoky Buenos Aires club, her crown replaced by a feathered headband. Michael, no longer a Grand Duke, captained a trawler in Halifax, laughing with fishermen over mussel stew. Tatiana sold postcards in Montreux, each bearing a cryptic couplet, but signed only with an initial. And in those final gestures, tango steps, trawler charts, handwritten odes, lay the true intimacy they had sought all along. The right to be known not by lineage, but by laughter, by shared cups of tea, by whispered secrets that counted more than any throne. Their bodies, once paraded in parades of power, learned the joy of touching and being touched without protocol's iron glove. They found in exile the chance to rewrite their own stories, to embrace lovers who gazed not at a sash or medallion, but into the depths of the human heart. So as the lights dim on this third chapter of our tale, remember that intimacy need not be grand or regal. Sometimes it is the tremor in a seamstress's hand, the precision of a postcard verse, or the static lace murmur of a voice across the wire. In the twilight of an empire, the Romanovs taught us that when crowns fall and batons break, what endures is the simple, absurd, inexorable need to be close, to share warmth in winter, to confide fear in darkness, and to believe that a stolen kiss can outlast 1,000 decrees. Part 4 awaits, where we'll trace the final twilight of imperial exile, from Hollywood stages to forgotten cemeteries, and discover how the last scions of the Tsars found love, loss, and liberation in the unlikeliest corners of a world remade by revolution. The sun settled into the Pacific like a weary traveler as Olga, the last surviving Romanov princess in America, stepped onto the soundstage of a Hollywood studio. Gone were the foggy halls of the Winter Palace and the circus tents of Paris. In their place stood a row of three-point lights and half-finished sets of Greco-Roman columns. A director with chalk-white hair barked, "Places!" And Olga, clutching a script thicker than a treaty, found herself cast as the doomed queen in a B-movie epic called Torn Crowns and Tragic Hearts. Her costume, a polyester cloak that tickled her neck and glued itself to her skin under the heat lamps. As she waited for her cue, enter weeping, collapse stage left, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a shiny prop urn, a Russian princess in cheap garb, about to feign despair for $10 a day. The absurdity hit her like sleet. Intimacy, once the delicate dance of courtship, was now reduced to hitting marks and pretending to faint for the camera's amusement. After the day's shoot, Olga lingered on the set's edge, trading war stories with a cowboy actor whose repertoire included 2 marriages and 1 divorce. He offered her a flask of whiskey, and she accepted with the formality of an ambassador. They retired to a corner of the lot, where she discovered that cowboy intimacy favored long silences and the occasional drawl. "You all right, ma'am?" Unlike Russian protocol, where every glance, every breath could be misread as political. Posturing. Here, touch was casual. A pat on the shoulder, a shared drink. She realized that real intimacy wasn't scripted, it was improvisational. The next day, she ad-libbed a moment of genuine surprise when her leading man kissed her hand instead of her cheek. The director loved it, called cut, and the scene made the final reel. Her one authentic gesture preserved in celluloid. Meanwhile, in London, Nicholas, once heir apparent, now an émigré banker, found that the city's austerity suited him. His evenings were spent in quiet clubs of well-to-do expats, sipping gin and discussing credit risks. But by night's end, his most thrilling moments were clandestine, borrowing the key to the women's powder room and hiding in a cubicle to kiss his secretary, Miss Davenport. He'd learned to love the hush of porcelain stalls, where their stolen embraces were muffled enough to keep scandal at bay. It was intimacy born of fear and secrecy, the same intoxicating rush his ancestors found when whispering in pillow chambers. He paid Miss Davenport handsomely for discretion, but the real currency was the stolen seconds their hands lingered on each other's cheeks before retreating to their public personas. In the Soviet Union, the Bolshevik authorities had long since declared the Romanovs enemies of the people. Yet Anna, a great-granddaughter of the Tsar, managed to slip back into Russia under an assumed name. She found work as a nurse in a Leningrad hospital amid drab corridors and omnipresent propaganda posters. There, she witnessed intimacy as a matter of survival. Exhausted doctors collapsing in corridors, embracing colleagues in tearful relief when a patient survived surgery. Nurses sharing cigarettes behind the boiler room, cheeks pressed together. Against the cold, Anna learned that intimacy in hardship was elemental. No silk pillows or semaphore flags, just bare skin against winter air, a head resting on someone's shoulder as explosions rumbled miles away. She scribbled letters to her cousin abroad, describing the warmth of human touch in a world that tried to banish every memory of her lineage. Back in America, Michael, the former Grand Duke who had become a small-town ship captain, met his match in Port Townsend, Washington, where he met Eleanor, a lighthouse keeper's daughter. Her family lived in a cottage built of driftwood and rusted buoys, perched on a rocky promontory overlooking the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Michael arrived on his schooner one foggy morning, delivering cargo for the lighthouse. Eleanor greeted him with a woolen blanket and a cup of thick coffee. She showed him how to light the lamp, and he taught her to tie knotwork sturdy enough for ocean storms. Their intimacy was practical. She wound his scarf tighter against the spray. He wrapped her in oilskin coat when the wind whipped. At night, they shared the lamp's glow, reading sea charts side by side, fingers tracing routes to lands she had only heard of in fairy tales. In Paris, the city of Madame Laval's salon long dismantled, Tatiana, now Tatiana Dubois, ran a modest patisserie on Rue Montorgueil. She crafted rose-flavored macarons so delicate they crumbled at the slightest squeeze. Her regulars included a philosophy student who spoke of Sartre's theories and a plumber who repaired her oven with the gentleness of a man caressing a kitten. Tatiana found intimacy in the kneading of dough and the steam of ovens, leaning over the countertop to guide a pastry bag, sharing a flour dust kiss when the bell over the door jingled. Her sign read macarons and memories, and she encouraged customers to write notes on the wrappers for loved ones. Love letters baked into pastries, a final, sweet absurdity in a life that had once been ruled by regiments and revolutions. In Belgrade, Xenia's prayer room confessionals were replaced by smoky jazz clubs hidden behind unmarked doors. She became known as Nadia to avoid detection, a widow who sang torch songs in Russian for émigré crowds. On stage, she wore a slinky black dress that shimmered under a single spotlight. Her voice trembled with longing as she sang of lost summers along the Neva and of love that outlasted crowns. Audience members wept. Sailors, diplomats, and ex-aristocrats pressed coins into her satin-lined guitar case. But true intimacy came after the final chord, when patrons pressed flowers between the folds of her dress and slipped away into moonlit streets, leaving her with petals crushed beneath her pumps, a bouquet of broken promises and tender vows. Across the Atlantic, in Buenos Aires, Maria, the exiled Serena, found refuge among tango dancers in La Boca's colorful alleyways. She adopted the name Maria Romanesca and strode into milongas wearing red heels and a rose in her hair. Her partner, a young tanguero named Ricardo, led her through Paso Doble steps and quiet cabeceo invitations. Their intimacy was a negotiation of steps and body leaning, the subtlest press of thigh against thigh, the tilt of a chin that asked questions only her eyes could answer. Under the haze of cigarette smoke and accordion notes, she rediscovered herself not as sovereign, but as a woman who could surrender in the dance without losing her dignity. In a modest flat in Mumbai, Ivan, the youngest Romanov descendant, worked for an international relief organization. He traveled into rural villages, distributing blankets and medical supplies. The local midwives taught him the ancient practices of postpartum care, turmeric baths, herbal poultices, and the nesting embrace, where mother and child lay cheek to cheek under a woven canopy. Ivan found intimacy in the cradle-like hush of those huts, the soft lull of mothers singing lullabies in scripts he couldn't read. It was a far cry from palace protocol. No eunuchs, no bells, no ivory bathtubs, only the rhythm of hearts beating against each other in a language older than any empire. By the twilight of that era, the once mighty Romanov name had diffused across continents like spilled caviar. Their descendants inhabited apartments and ranches, studios and labs, knitting together lives that bore little resemblance to the gilded cages of their forebears. Yet wherever they went, they carried a legacy of strange intimacy habits, memories encoded in rituals, in whispered codes, in stolen moments under half-burned lamps. They learned that intimacy need not be grand. It could be a shared cup of coffee on a foggy dock, a pastry-flavored love note, a whisper through static on an ancient telephone line. In 1997, when the Russian government finally permitted the reburial of the last Tsar and his family in St. Petersburg, relatives gathered in a small contingent. They traveled incognito, some as journalists, others as art historians. At the edge of the Peter and Paul fortress, they assembled in the bronze rotunda, sheltering from a drizzle that turned the marble floors slick. Anna, the nurse-turned-secret monk of Leningrad, knelt by the tombs and placed a single white lily upon each sarcophagus. She murmured a bedtime prayer her grandmother taught her, not for political ambitions, but for souls seeking peace. The hush of the ceremony felt like the deepest intimacy of all, a collective farewell, a bridge across centuries of exile and absurdity. As the pallbearers lifted the heavy gates and the bells tolled overhead, the assembled family members, some dressed in simple jackets, others in black mourning veils, found themselves united by something more profound than blood or title. They exchanged glances, tentative smiles in the rain, and realized that at the end of all grandeur, there remained a universal truth, the need to touch another human being, to lean on a shoulder, to whisper a confession of love or grief. In that moment, the circle of czars and exiles dissolved into ordinary people bound by tenderness. Across the years, the stories of their estranged rituals, be it semaphore flags or birch bark mattresses, became anecdotes in history books. But those final moments at St. Petersburg, those lilies on cold stone, captured the essence of intimacy in its purest form, vulnerability shared in silence. And as the drizzle subsided and the sun broke through gray clouds, the descendants embraced, tears mingling with raindrops, proving that no matter how strange the protocols of power, the human heart ultimately seeks one simple act: connection.